If you disobey me and remain hostile to me, I will act against you in wrathful hostility. I, for my part, will discipline you sevenfold for your sins. You shall eat the flesh of your sons and the flesh of your daughters. I will destroy your cult places and cut down your incense stands, and I will heap your carcasses upon your lifeless idols. I will spurn you. I will lay your cities in ruin and make your sanctuaries desolate, and I will not savour your pleasing odours. I will make the land desolate, so that your enemies who settle it shall be appalled by it. And you I will scatter among the nations, and I will unsheathe the sword against you. Your land shall become a desolation, and your cities a ruin. An angel drops a gun at your feet, wanting you to kill God. This video is a complete remake of my first ever long-form video. The reason I decided to remake it was to bring it up to my current standard of content, but also to make an overall better video. Baroque is also one of my favourite games of all time. The older video has been unlisted and not deleted, and you can still watch it in the unlisted playlist on the channel. The reason for this is because, well, like many YouTubers, our first videos aren't the best, and we often get rid of them to create a better and more consistent flow of content on the channel. Quite simple. This video is overall a better one and includes more content, analysis, better sourcing, and editing. In fact, the script is completely new and the video overall follows a much better structure. If you watch the original video, then I will recommend you watch this one still, because again, it is simply better and has more things to say and is far more understandable. I go over not just the original game, but some of the spin-offs too, and some other outside material, of which have been recently released on Steam, which allows me to go over them much easier. I want to give a special thank you to the Nerve Tower website, who provided much of the information sourced in this video, as well as some translations. The important pieces of information I've sourced will have a number attached to them in the sources document in the description, and at the bottom of the screen will appear a source whenever I use information from it. This will mostly be relevant in the first parts of the video, which are incredibly research heavy. All of that being said, thank you for watching. Baroque is a game built for the Sega Saturn by Sting Entertainment, the original 1998 release, that is. It was later remade and somewhat modernised for the PlayStation 2 and Nintendo Wii. This video will only be focusing on the Sega Saturn and PlayStation 1 versions of the game, as they are the versions that are closest to the story writer and director's vision, Kazunari Yonemitsu. Yonemitsu works on a game known as Treasure Hunter G, which is a massive tonal shift from Baroque. Yonemitsu even stated the following after being asked if there is anything in common between Treasure Hunter G and Baroque. Quote, "There isn't. Baroque is more like a reaction to Treasure Hunter G. Everything about the development of Treasure Hunter G was nice and neat. I made an adventurous tale of courageous young boys over the course of a year, so the reaction was to make Baroque with a sense that I've already done nice and neat." Unquote. Yonemitsu had no desire to go back to the same sort of tone Treasure Hunter G had, no straightforward story about love and courage. Rather, it is a, quote, work by people who want to be moved, unquote, verbatim. Baroque being a dungeon crawler was something planned early on. It was originally going to be released on an old lineup of 16 and 32-bit computers, but it was soon noticed that the vision of the game wouldn't be fully realised on such hardware, so instead focus shifted to the Sega Saturn, which was the correct choice despite the developers having an increased workload thanks to the 3D map data. The port to the PlayStation 1 happened in the following year, and besides some differences that some may debate degrade the experience, it is largely the same game as the Sega Saturn's version, being the original version. The thing is about Baroque Sega Saturn and PlayStation 1 versions though is the fact that it was never officially released in English, meaning that for this video I had to install a patch by Pliskin. Special thanks to them, the patch is linked in the description. Baroque's inspirations are many, but Yonemitsu went to credit 3 movies: Blade Runner, Delicatessen, and Cannon Town from the movie collection Memories. Baroque's dull colour tone is especially attributed to Eastern European cinema and film noir. Baroque's music was composed by Masaharu Iwata, and I say without hesitation it is one of the greatest video game soundtracks ever made. Filled with a perfect atmosphere that is both adrenaline pumping yet also somehow melancholic. Yonemitsu asked Iwata to make music that didn't sound anything archetypal, music that wasn't music. Instead, he wanted a soundtrack that used ambient sound. Quote, "I asked for him to make sounds for the game but not make music. It was an unreasonable request. As a matter of fact, when I was coming up with the concept of Baroque, I wanted it to not have any music. For example, while walking in the dungeon, you would hear the sounds of exhaust ports on the walls, your footsteps, and the sound of moving enemies through the binaural recordings. The idea was to make it sound like a reproduction of a real place, so I only wanted environmental sounds." Unquote. When talking about the music, Yonemitsu simply asked Iwata to not make music. And without proper comparisons or inspirations to compare to, Iwata understandably struggled. This lack of direction didn't go without complaints. Yonemitsu tried everything to make Iwata understand the approach he wanted, sending him documentaries and emails that contained surreal poetry. Yonemitsu soon sent Iwata soundtracks for the anime Nighthead Genesis and some music by the Welsh composer Carl Jenkins. Baroque's general sound design flows well with the music, and there is no contrasting tone between the two. This is surprising since despite being given a more clear direction after asking for such, he said the following in an interview when asked about his experience composing Baroque. Quote, "The individuality of the game designer, the requested melodies, and the contents of games were all new experiences for me. It was difficult to grab their sense. I would like to thank Sting and John P for this game, Treasure Hunter G and many other games." Unquote. It was a completely new experience for him, yet he absolutely nailed it. Despite Iwata creating the music, Yonemitsu, the director and writer, was the one who named the tracks. This is mostly sourced from the confusion Iwata initially felt. Maybe he felt like the confusion he felt surrounding the premise may disrupt the naming conventions he could introduce. Baroque's gameplay is incredibly simple in its literal gameplay, but there are many mechanics at play considering the amount of possibilities there are in combat. This is mostly thanks to the items you can use and the status effects in the game. Whilst the game is in first person, you do not ever see your character's weapon being swung, besides the effect of such. For example, if you punch, you will see the effect of a blunt impact on your enemy. Meanwhile, if you swing a sword, you will see a slash cut across the screen. Another thing about Baroque is that your sword swing can be interrupted in a hallway much like Dark Souls, meaning that positioning can actually be very important in this game, as corridors are very common in the generated maps. In Sega Saturn fashion, it runs at what I believe is 30 FPS, but the sprites of the enemies run a lot slower than that. Speaking of sprites, they are absolutely stunning. Sprites only encompass the characters and creatures you fight, whilst the environment itself is mostly 3D. You will be fighting a lot in this game, trust me. Fortunately, the combat isn't too much of a headache unless you struggle with tank controls. Baroque has some CGI cutscenes too, the design of which was headed by Eisaku Kito, and produced by the American CGI studio Inertia Pictures. The time difference between Japan and the US was a bit of a trouble, but the CGI cutscenes in the game are absolutely amazing and have aged quite well. The characters themselves were designed by Hyoju Mu, who also worked on the visual design for Baroque Shooting, one of the spin-off games covered later in this video. When you approach NPCs to talk to them, they simply speak to you. Oftentimes it's quite cryptic, but other times it's straightforward. Sometimes they just don't speak at all and make noises instead. Baroque in general is quite bewildering, but my job today is to put it all together in a concise format. There are 12 item types in Baroque: weapons, coats, imitation wings, entrails, boxes, ampoules, brands, torturers, patterns, bones, parasites, and crystals. You'll notice that many of these category names are unique, and this is on brand with Yonemitsu's vision of not wanting to make a typical RPG and RPG story. Weapons and coats are your armor, respectively, and the former has the typical stats of attack power, speed, critical hit rate, and throwing damage. You can throw most items in this game for various effects. Sometimes you do so to give NPCs requested or not requested items. Coats, meanwhile, have a simple defense stat. The higher the defense, the less damage you take. Imitation wings are your typical accessories that give various buffs. Sometimes they are percentage based, sometimes not. For example, they may increase your defense and critical hit by a certain amount, give extra experience, granting resistance against certain status effects, etc. You may come across the stubborn coat and wings, which cannot be unequipped but double your defense when used together. An example of what Baroque's gear is really like. Entrails are consumables that restore certain attributes on your character, such as your HP, but they may also reduce, restore, or increase your other attribute called VT. More on them during the game itself. Boxes are containers that have a wide variety of effects and most likely contain one of the many items found in the game. Ampoules are various curatives, buffs, and debuffs that can apply to your character in many scenarios. Some cure ailments, some increase and lower your level, while some may increase the defense of your current coat. Brands, also known as sigils, are, well, they're a little bit random. They do a bit of everything. Some will heal you, and hell, some may just delete items. They seem to mostly be beneficial, but there is a gamble using items in general in this game without identifying them. Oh yeah, there's a system for identifying items too. Hence why some items aren't a good idea to use in the first place, because you wouldn't know their effects prior to using them unless you identify them. Some consumable items can identify, but sometimes items are already identified upon picking them up. Of course, you can use an item to find out what it does, but again, quite risky. I'm a moron, so during my time playing the game, I would use most unidentified items out of desperation. This causes more depth in the decision making of the game besides using items you already know the purpose of. Do I use this item even though I have no idea what it'll do? Will it be worth it? There is no way of knowing until you try or at least identify it. This is why Baroque is such a good game and why its gameplay is so fun despite it, at its surface, being quite simple. Torturers are devices that cause various ailments to nearby enemies, but can sometimes cause various unique effects, including teleporting every enemy and item in the current area to the room you are in, which you can then use another item that will destroy them all or turn them into a useful item. This is just an example of what you can do in this game. A debate may occur that this may cause performance issues, especially on the Sega Saturn, but Baroque's floor-by-floor structure allows things like this to happen without many issues occurring. One advantage of having instance areas that are small like this is that, especially on older software, you can pull off technically taxing feats that are fun to the player. Of course, it would be cool to do it for a larger amount of floors at once, but again, this is as much as they could do on the Sega Saturn without it exploding, and it's still very fun to do. Baroque does a lot right when it comes to acknowledging the limitations of its software and pulling off feats that are quite impressive, whilst touching the ceiling of said limitation. The Sega Saturn is actually stronger in many ways when compared to the PlayStation 1, but the hardware is incredibly complex. The PlayStation 1, however, whilst weaker, has a much simpler architecture, especially for 3D programming. The Saturn is simply better for 2D visuals and has a better sound chip, but overall the PlayStation 1 is simply stronger when it comes to 3D rendering, and was generally easier to develop games on. FMV playback is also better across the board on PlayStation 1, as it has a dedicated video decoder chip by default. Of course, Baroque is on the PlayStation 1, but the port has many issues, especially visually. An argument could be made that it is good the game launched on the Sega Saturn because of this, but keep in mind the PlayStation 1 version of the game is a port, which are often made quite lazily, especially today. Plus the technicalities of porting a Sega Saturn game to the PlayStation 1 was probably extremely difficult to do. Okay, returning to items. Patterns are essentially mines. You can tell if they are active or not depending on their sprite, but they are very simple. Most deal damage or cause ailments, but some can be beneficial to you. Bones are often thrown at enemies and cause various effects. Finally is the parasite, commonly referred to as worms. If I was to compare them to anything from any other game, it would be materia from Final Fantasy. Whilst their name suggests they have a debilitating nature to them, many of them are actually quite helpful. They can infest your items, and sometimes can even be thrown at enemies to inflict their effects onto them instead of you. You will typically do the latter if the parasite is already identified, and you know its nature will not help you. Some parasite effects stack, which allows you to create some insane scenarios. You can also cultivate them, but I'll get more into that later. As for the status effects themselves, I would like to bring them up when relevant when I go through the game itself. The very nature of Baroque's gameplay is filled with randomization and experimentation. It's a good way to adopt a sort of strategy into your extremely simple combat system. Without the need to identify, the game would be incredibly boring and fall short with retention. Despite me stating it is simple, there is still a sense of depth even without the identify system. The parasites are a large reason for that, as they make up a bulk of your build during your time in the game. The essential loop of Baroque's combat is to spam your attack weapon and use various items of various types depending on your current needs. The fun of Baroque is combining these items in ways that will at first seem ridiculous, but when you pull them off, you can do really insane things. Baroque also has a leveling system, so you get a sense of dopamine in that regard too, because when you level, your stats will increase, and the more you level, the more experience is needed to get the next one, which is a standard across games with a leveling system as a whole, to prevent a level imbalance early on. The max level one can reach is 99, but I doubt many will even get close to that. It honestly bugs me when levels get capped in a single player game, because the player should be rewarded for their efforts, grindy or not, and whether or not you'll even get close to reaching the max level. Single player games don't need to be balanced like multiplayer ones should, unless it's something that is actively ruining and trivializing the gameplay experience across the board. One such example is the stealth archery in Skyrim. Is it overpowered once you get to a certain point? Yes. But did it ever need fixing? No. You can simply not do it, and the consequence of doing stealth archery is nothing but making the game easier. It is like any other build besides that. Everyone will gain the same sense of progression that will only differ on their build. Everyone will get stronger. Either way, Baroque isn't terribly difficult, and most people will scrape by the game improvising with what they have in their inventory. It really is all about optimizing the current situation, rather than preparing for what is to come. This is because death in Baroque, besides literally expanding the narrative, causes a sort of reset on your character in most regards. But I will expand on that in the next section. All you need to know is that Baroque is a roguelike. To not twist anything, I will literally look at the Wikipedia definition of the genre. Quote, roguelike is a style of role-playing game traditionally characterized by a dungeon crawl through procedurally generated levels, turn-based gameplay, grid-based movement, and a permanent death of the player character. Most roguelikes are based on a high fantasy narrative, reflecting the influence of tabletop role-playing games such as Dungeons & Dragons. Unquote. Baroque has a few of these connotations, namely the procedural generation and the sort of permanent death. Again, death in Baroque doesn't delete your save file or anything. Some may argue it lacks things that make it a roguelike, but you need to remember the few things Baroque has that makes it a roguelike are major, and I mean major aspects of the game that make it what it is. Death sends you back to the start of your run with your items and level completely reset. Another thing that helps with Baroque's combat experience amidst its base simplicity is the absolutely amazing enemy design in both literal sprite art, but also in their variety and how much of the enemies feel unique. I will be mentioning them as we go. They go by a few names, including grotesques, grotesqueries, and meta-beings. I will use them interchangeably, but grotesques is what I prefer. Okay, it's about time I actually get into the game itself. I will continue to expand on the gameplay during it, but now you should have a good idea of what the base gameplay of Baroque is like. Baroque's idle screen in the menu is an FMV, being a full motion video. The music is actually quite different from the majority of the tracks in the game, which has me question why exactly they include it. The FMV itself is oddly chaotic as well, which, whilst lore-friendly, again goes against the wider tone of the game. Maybe it was made earlier on, but even then, Yonemitsu had a general idea of the tone of the game, so much so that it was unconventional to many, including Iwata as discussed. Yet despite this, the FMV comes across as a somewhat generic sci-fi trailer. I don't dislike it, I actually quite enjoy it, but it's a tonal whiplash from literally the rest of the entire game. The music is the biggest issue here for me personally. If it was any other track from the game, especially one of the many tracks that make you feel a sense of dread, then maybe it would work better. Hell, no FMV at all, or maybe even a simple credit sequence with the various in-game assets cut in would have worked too. There are credits in this FMV, and it's the few short sequences of it I actually like that also fit the aesthetic of the game. This is the only time Baroque misses when it comes to tonal consistency. After this point, it's pretty harmonious. Another thing to consider is that it is entirely optional and only plays when you idle on the screen for too long at the main menu. Pressing play, you are told to enter a name to create some data, which is typical. Immediately after, the game starts with a much more tonally appropriate cutscene, with a -1 appearing in the bottom right. This is all important for later, but for now it will make no sense. It seems to be a lot of medical terminology being read off by an unspoken reader, which is a standard in Baroque because there is absolutely no read dialogue in the entire game as far as I'm aware. When it comes to this terminology, I will actually be ignoring a lot of it because it's mostly just not relevant for the wider analysis to remember every single word, so I will instead be describing them in the simplest way possible if I ever need to. Panning toward a sort of tank, you will see a person's face inside it. From here, the game will start after a screen that you will become very used to by the time it is over. A sort of stat screen that reads off your current location, XP, level, HP, VT, attack and defense. Your stats can be drained, hence why they have your current amount and your maximum amount next to even your attack and defense. Whenever you enter the inventory screen, you will see this information too, which is good because many items will actively tweak these stats at one point or another. Some games completely fail to realize this and have the stat and inventory screens separated, so you will need to back out of one to refer to the other. Despite Baroque being in an era of quite dated and obnoxious game design, it at least retains simplicity enough in not just combat but also in its menuing, to the point where it feels good to play. Ignoring the tank controls of course, but that is entirely subjective. Plus, tank controls, you can get used to them relatively fast. But that is the only thing I will ever pen as annoying, and even then it isn't necessarily objective. One thing I wish Baroque had was a sensitivity option for turning around, because it can be quite slow at times, especially when things consistently sneak up behind you and, well, hit you in the ass. Anyway, you begin in the outer world. This is a hub area of Baroque, but even then it doesn't contain things that make up a conventional hub area with vendors, etc. In fact, vendors don't exist at all, and the closest thing to money is your XP, because your XP is directly tied to your level, which is tied to your progression and your power, the latter of which could be increased further with money in many games, but no. Baroque is all about pressing onward until you figure out how your enemies work and what the various status effects and items do. Sometimes you get good runs, sometimes you won't, but even if you have to start over after dying, you would have at least learned one thing. Whether this is about the game itself or what not to do during your runs. This applies to many roguelikes, but again, unlike most games, Baroque has you face things head on, rather than inflating your power through money you may have grinded on top of having XP gains. Some are balanced with this in mind, but many are not. And at the end of the day, if you can pay for power with in-game currency, then you will eventually get people who are able to purchase power to the point of being more powerful than intended. This doesn't apply to all games, of course. For example, a recent release, Expedition 33, does a good job at capping resources you can buy at vendors, and even then you are rewarded for exploring, but not too much. At least during the game itself, because by the end game comes around it's quite easy to get overpowered, but that's fine considering that boss. Capping resources is one good solution for this entire problem, even if it comes across as annoying to some players. You are forced to adapt and learn rather than purchase things that will remove your inconveniences. Of course, you could use this very same argument against my prior point of levels, but again, I do believe it's quite different to go out your way to purchase something rather than grinding for it. The Outer World is a sort of rustic town. Nearby are various later discussed NPCs which stand in place, but their sprites react when you approach or talk to them. Fortunately, the layout of the town is incredibly simple, and you can even bring up a simple map if you're stuck on where to go. This also applies to the primary dungeon of the game, the Nerve Tower, also known as the Neuro Tower. You will see it on the horizon instantly after spawning into the game. It is the key iconography of Baroque. Getting lost, you will eventually be guided to the front of the tower by an NPC called Coffin Man. The NPCs all have their own names and some have their own little quest lines, but for now let's focus on this first part of the game. It is all as vague in the game right now as it is in the video, but this is all meant to be alienating because the protagonist, too, is in a somewhat clueless situation. Some of the ruins nearby this town are in the shape of the Christian cross, and this is the first of many nods towards Abrahamic, especially Christian theming and inspiration. Similarly to Hideaki Anno's Evangelion, Baroque's iconography, when it relates to religion, is not intended to draw any comparison to any religion, rather because of the literal design of various interpretations. It just so happens that the Christian cross is quite recognizable, even to those in Japan whose population has a large Shinto population, which is a religion focused around nature worship and Buddhism. There is more to Shinto than that, but I'll get into that a bit more later since it's a little relevant to some parts of Baroque. If you turn around as soon as you spawn in the Outer World, you will be guided away from the laboratory you exited from by a guard called the Sentry Angel, who actually has permission to kill you but chooses not to. Just proves how expendable you are to these people. Next to a spiky mechanical object covered in what looks to be a force field is a holographic angel figure. At first it's quite hard to tell he is holographic, but there is a slightly lower opacity to him compared to the other NPCs, meaning you can look right through him. This is the Archangel, and he asks you if you remember anything. Well, no, we as the player don't. He also comments on our lack of speaking being sourced from a difficulty to do so. So the game also gives a reason why there are no dialogue options. I'm a big fan when games do this because it's one of the biggest faults of games with a silent protagonist, a lack of reason. He tells you that you're here to understand why you're here, and what your objective is. Again, literally putting the player into the head of the character they are controlling. All he tells you to do is head for the depths of the Nerve Tower, dropping a gun called the Angelic Rifle at your feet. He claims there is significance to it. Amidst the confusion of the beginning, Baroque at least gives you a sense of simplicity in its objective. You always see the Nerve Tower on the horizon, and your simple objective is to just reach the bottom of it. Unlike many other dungeon crawlers, you don't ascend the tower, rather descend it into the ground. Whatever the Archangel wants you to do, it must be something to do with eliminating something with the Angelic Rifle. So, how do you know it isn't just a common weapon given to you for self-defense? Well, on the outskirts of the town are actually some enemies, which we know are called grotesques thanks to the Angelic Rifle listing what it can destroy. These are Moon, floating, fish-like enemies with a biting attack. They are incredibly weak, and if you attack them without a weapon, you will simply just punch them, which will take a handful of hits to kill them. So, what does the Angelic Rifle do? Well, it completely eradicates them in a single shot. But here's the catch, it only has 5 bullets every run. The Angelic Rifle kills anything in a singular shot. How nice of the Archangel to give you this, but his comment about its significance suggests that the ammunition in it may need to be saved for whatever is near the depths of the nerve tower. You can either use it in emergency situations, go crazy and waste your ammo on anything, or don't use it until absolutely needed, which seems to be the Archangel's suggestion, although he literally didn't say that, which is odd if that is really what he wants. Which it is, by the way. His later expanded on pun literally falls apart without it. Anyway, to the nerve tower. Each floor of the tower has a number and a letter to represent its location. The map layout is random, but the enemies and characters that appear are not. This means the story progresses in a straightforward way. This means that the learning aspect of Baroque doesn't become too exhaustive. Either way, the floor-by-floor gameplay of Baroque is extremely simple. Simply find the portal to the next floor. You don't have to kill every enemy, all you need to do is physically progress. This lean towards moving swiftly throughout the tower is further encouraged by the VT system explained in a moment. Early floors have the moon grotesques that actually come in a normal and smaller form. The smaller form has less HP and therefore drops less XP. A lot of the time, you won't be able to dodge melee attacks from enemies in Baroque due to the fast movement speed, but also because of the awkward tank controls. You may also find another frog-like insect called Gru. Not the Despicable Me Gru, it's spelt with an E at the end of it. It's actually possible to just run over them to crush them. Again, the weaker the enemy, the less XP. Early on, you'll realise the plethora of items that drop. It's a lot and sometimes can be quite overwhelming. Luckily, the descriptions of what items do is incredibly simple, and again, sometimes you need to identify items via other items to even know what they do. Not just that, but next to the name of an item is the simple stat boost it has, so you can quickly see what the base stats of an item does before hovering over it. A fun fact is that if you throw an item with the identifying property at an enemy, you'll get told how much HP the enemy currently has. This is because Baroque has no way of identifying how hurt an enemy is outside of this. Another thing is the existence of rotten entrails, which are clearly marked with a giant R in your inventory on the fan-made English patch of the game. Entrails, again, are consumables with various effects. They come in the form of flesh and hearts. There is a set chance that entrail will be rotten when you pick it up, which will cause the stomach ache effect if you consume it. This will lower your attack and defense. You can heat rotten entrails up through various means to get rid of the rotten effect, which actually implies it's raw rather than rotten. This, though, will actually burn it, which also makes sense. Burnt versions of flesh and heart still restore HP, but don't heal your VT as much. Now is a good time to explain what exactly VT is. In Baroque, your VT, which stands for Vitality, will constantly drain. You can increase the maximum amount you have and restore it through various items, but once it reaches 0, your HP will slowly start to drain. As long as you have VT, your HP will slowly regenerate too. It is essentially a time limit you have whilst in the tower. This either encourages you to hurry up or to slow down, depending on what sort of player you are. And it's almost the way the game pads its runtime. So, let's say you go to the backlogged page for Baroque and scroll the reviews whilst looking at the ones with a log time. You actually see it is quite varied. The VT system affects people in one of the two ways just explained, or people neglect it as much as possible, which I doubt because Baroque can get quite difficult in the deeper floors of the tower, especially if you don't keep an eye on your VT. Another way of looking at this mechanic is that it is encouraging you to press on as much as possible, as you need new items to even consider increasing your HP and VT. Overall, I'm not sure what to think of the VT system. It does feel like padding, but some may like having to manage another number on their screen besides HP, which will remain static if it wasn't for the enemies and the VT system. I can understand both points of views. Besides throwing food into literal fire to get rid of its rotten state, you can also give it to an NPC called the Crypt Angel. This, believe it or not, is a blacksmith, and giving it certain items will convert or synthesize the items into something else. One such example is, of course, a rotten piece of meat that will get restored into a normal state. There are many possibilities when it comes to the Crypt Angel, but to put it simply, it's the closest thing to crafting and refining in Baroque. You can throw some pairs of items at it to receive another random item, for example. When you do so, the first item will spin around it, whilst waiting for another item to be combined into it. If you try to attack it, it'll simply tell you via some vague text across the screen that it isn't your enemy, and is instead used for synthesis. It also says purification isn't needed. So now we know that you are actually doing a process called purification to the grotesques in the tower, rather than killing them. Guess we'll have to find out what that means. Of course, the Crypt Angel only appears on certain floors, but again, they are defined, not random. The map layout is random, the NPCs are not. You can prepare beforehand to synthesize the Crypt Angel if you know what floors it appears in. Because the game's randomization doesn't extend to characters that appear who progress the wider story, you will be able to follow guides online to complete the game as fast as possible. It's completely possible to follow a guide that is go to this floor, do this, then go here. Even if you are stuck in Baroque somehow, there is a very clear progression in mind because again, the means of randomization don't necessarily extend to the wider narrative, which therefore extends to the wider game and leads to the true ending. As you move down the tower, you will become familiar with traps. One such trap is a large fireball which will absolutely destroy you if you, or a grotesque, activate it via a pressure plate. And because they will often be funneled into a hallway, you'll have to run back across the plate to activate it again, or press onward into the room the trap itself is in, which will no doubt have some enemies inside it. Small split-second choices like this are what make Baroque interesting beyond the randomization featured across the board. One movement tech you can do here to avoid getting hit by a fireball after running across a pressure plate is by holding down one of the trigger buttons on your controller. This causes you to strafe sideways. If you move forward and strafe at the same time, your movement speed will be greatly increased, which will, in turn, make it easier to quickly run out of the corridor before the fireball slams into you. The Kato is a rolling grotesque which will come out of a small hole to hit you with its tongue. They can be quite tanky and can spawn the prior mentioned grooves from their mouths. Kato are fairly slow when they attack you, unlike moons, so you may be able to dodge their attacks if you back away quick enough. Glyro, or Glero, I'm really not sure, are the first grotesque that I consider a real threat. Beyond their pretty high damage, at least this early on, and speed, they can outright steal items from your inventory and run away with them. If you find and kill them, they will drop it, but if they steal from you again, your previous item they stole will be deleted. Luckily, they have an animation for stealing, so it may be possible to move away before they manage to steal anything. One thing that is beneficial when it comes to Glero though is that they can remove items that are stuck to you. The stuck mechanic is quite simple. Most equipable items have a set chance to become stuck to you, meaning that, upon being equipped, they will not be able to be unequipped through conventional means. Besides the Glero, there are some items that can help with this. Extremely simple, if not an oddly placed mechanic that isn't fully explained lore-wise. By this point in the game, you'll want to figure out how to save. Well, to save, you need to quit the game. Every time you descend the tower, or die, you are offered a chance to suspend. This is your chance to save the game, but unfortunately when you save, you are forced to shut off the Sega Saturn. In my case, I had to restart the emulator. Extremely tedious, but I guess it is the game's way of emphasizing that this game is a roguelike, which emphasize runs being a thing which are often done in one sitting. This also prevents save scumming, so whilst it may be tedious, I understand why the save system is the way it is. Another disgusting grotesque you'll encounter early on is the Bulger. These gassy folk can fart in your direction to cause blindness. This heavily reduces your view distance, which can especially be bad when you walk into a new room. Like many grotesques, they also deal melee damage and have a large and small variant. By this point, you'll also encounter another NPC called Mind Reading Thing. Yes, Thing, despite it clearly being a sort of person. To our protagonist's point of view, she is most likely mangled beyond belief. She has plenty of dialogue, be it from lore to gameplay hints. For example, she will tell you about the Crypt Angel and how exactly it works. Besides the Coffin Man's dungeon in the outer world, she is the closest thing to a tutorial in Baroque. I'll get to that in just a moment, by the way. She seems to be able to read the minds of those around her, hence her name. You can give her some items which will cause her to give you a pattern or a bone in exchange. Keep in mind though, this isn't the Crypt Angel. It seems to be purely random what she gives you, and a lot of the time they will be unidentified. She also goes over some lore and story hints, but so far I've kept a lot of it out. Want to know why? Well, everything that happens in this run doesn't matter. If you die, it is revealed that this initial run of the game, marked by the -1 in the starting cutscene, is actually a simulation. When you die in this run, you will be shown another cutscene filled with medical terminology. My favourites. I mean, look at this word right here. Come on, like seriously? Anyway, there are a few important lines here to keep in mind though. It's told that it's difficult to live in this world without some sort of Baroque, meaning that a Baroque is something beyond an art form in this game. Once the protagonist wakes up from their simulation, they are told that the real atonement for their sins begins here. A sin. They, the player character, did something horrible. Something we are yet to find out. This sin leads to them working for the Archangel, and obeying him to the point of entering the nerve tower with the angelic rifle. Of course, the protagonist has been conditioned to a point, hence the simulation. The simulation was there to nail the objective into their head. Whilst we, as the player, did it once, the protagonist canonically probably did it many times. The town's layout doesn't change much when compared to the simulation, so there is no waste in knowledge. If you don't die in the simulation, you can reach the final area of the game and be sent back. However, it is a heavily condensed version of the tower, being less than half of the length of the normal initial run. This is enough time to become familiar with the game's mechanics and how the tower is laid out, presuming you don't die in the first or second floor, which is very unlikely if you are at least a little bit familiar with the controls. Approaching the Archangel, you will find that he does the same thing he does in the simulation, talks to you very briefly and drops the angelic rifle at your feet. The Archangel will continue to appear here to give you a brief exposition and gameplay tips, as well as give you the rifle. Because of this, it's okay to use the rifle in emergency situations, as long as you have one of the 5 pieces of ammunition it comes with. He can also tell you about a pattern nearby which will refresh your HP and VT, so if you take a while in the outer world you can at least do that. He also tells you about sensophirs and how they work both in and out of the nerve tower. Sensophirs, according to the Archangel, can be used as tools for absorbing and spewing forth information. This includes knowledge, items, and voices. Every experience you go through in the nerve tower is remembered by the sensophirs and replanted into other copies of you. This is a sort of ludonarrative device that complements both how exactly the clones work, but also a reason you, as the player, learn. When you die, a clone comes back with all your memories, well, most of your memories. The memories of your run, that is. Most roguelikes completely dismiss this, and instead you just have to start a new run with no canon explanation for the knowledge that you have, which applies to the character in the game. If you die over and over, the Archangel will become frustrated at you, asking if your knowledge that has been passed down through many of the clones is enough in the first place. He may even call you incompetent. In the nerve tower itself, you will also find some sensophirs. Throwing an item into them will transport them back to the surface. This is pretty much the only way of progression across runs besides the narrative itself. It emphasizes and encourages both inventory and gameplay management. On a run that you know will end badly but have some items you want to save for a better run, throw them into the sensophere. They will end up right back on the surface near the sensophirs next to the Archangel. It's completely optional, of course, but it's an option. Just make sure to pick them up before entering the nerve tower if you're on the Sega Saturn version of the game, or they will despawn as soon as you enter the tower. Of course, the wider story of Baroque, both in the game itself at this point and in the video, is incredibly vague, and it stays like this for a while, at least until you complete your initial run. If you are confused what exactly is going on right now, that's 100% intentional, especially on the game's part. It very quickly unfolds itself some hours in. Before leaving, it's a good idea to go back to the Coffin Man and do his dungeon, which he calls the Dungeon of Terror. This is basically a tutorial gauntlet. Every floor you go down has Coffin Man give you more tips about the game. Baroque does have a good amount of tutorials in this area, it's just that they're all optional and you have to go out of your way to find them. One thing you'll quickly realise about Coffin Man is that he swears a lot. This caught me off guard because the other characters in the game don't really curse at all. I guess it is one way of separating them from the rest beyond having an entire tutorial dungeon. Here you will learn grotesques can also multiply, meaning that if you turn your back for too long or backtrack to a room you've already been through, grotesques may have respawned. Whenever you kill a grotesque, you will be able to collect a small orb to restore VT. It's also revealed by Coffin Man they are called Idea Sephiroth, or Sephira. Here will also be a good chance to become familiar with statuses. Lust makes items and enemies look like, according to Coffin Man, hot chicks. This can especially be deadly because everything will look the same, and you might run into an enemy you wouldn't want to encounter versus one you won't really have a problem fighting. Poison causes your screen to go green and your HP to drain. Paralysis makes you unable to move for some time. Confusion randomizes your movement, and lethargy makes you incredibly slow. Many players will actually outright miss this tutorial dungeon because, again, it's optional, and it's not really on the path to the Nerve Tower itself, which is a shame because it massively helps with the somewhat high bar of entry Baroque has. Although the bar of entry is typically before you start the game because you have to emulate it and patch it, which, let me tell you, can be quite annoying. Unless, of course, you know Japanese. It's a good idea to do the Terror Dungeon though, if you have the time to do it, because you actually keep the items acquired inside it should you finish it. Of course, you will normally lose them if you die, but either way, it's always good to have as many items as possible early on in the tower. So, the NPCs. Neck Thing is a deformed man with a long neck and spine. Or should I say, distorted man. I say distorted because the world is described as such by not just the Archangel, but the other characters in the game. Neck Thing seeks a heart seed, a sort of entrail item. Here we learn the name for the order the Archangel leads, the Order of Malkuth. Malkuth, in simple terms, is the word for kingdom in Hebrew. In some forms of esotericism, it is often associated with Earth. He will also tell you of a group called the Coriel, who have split off from them and are being punished, and the Malkuth order may have been broken up since the end of the world. He hopes that the Archangel can heal this distorted world. Neckthing despairs at not just the world, but also at his own existence. He claims he has no right to live on this earth. He feels a great sin, and well, we're gonna have to find out what that sin is later on. The Horned Woman is quite different, but you'll notice a lot of the NPCs in the game are distorted, not just in appearance but also in mind. Mind Reading Thing in the Nerve Tower says the following about the Horned Woman. You'll find the Horned Woman is better avoided. She is without a sense of self, so she becomes like those around her. The Great Heat Wave has distorted even the boundaries between one person and another. And indeed, her dialogue reflects the thoughts and feelings of various NPCs, but this dialogue is very much in the form of rambles which are often incoherent. Sackthing is a girl with a bit of a questline attached to her related to another NPC in the tower. She seems to have a photogenic memory which applies to every experience she has ever had, as well as remembering everything someone has said in her vicinity. Because of this, she is a valuable insight into the other characters. If you give her a certain item, she will tell you how to use them. One curious thing she says though is about her father. My father was speaking. He said, rather than watching you distort, I think I would be happier if we died together. As my father's hands tightened around my neck, I spoke. Father, I don't want to die. I don't want to die. Help me. Stop it. This actually triggers after meeting her father in the Nerve Tower, who I will get to. It seems in his desperation he would have rather seen her die by his own hands than become the state that she is in now. His motivations aren't completely unfounded, as the state of the world is currently in is anything but happy, but killing his own child doesn't dismiss potential insanity on his end. Like many things, we will have to come back to this. Another thing she states though is regarding the Archangel. The Archangel was speaking. If the creator and preserver has a core, then the world can be remade as many times as one pleases. The next world will be created and preserved by me. I will return the world to normality in an instant. It seems the Archangel's motivations aren't innocent. This will be guessed by many based on his dialogue alone, but many will also outright dismiss this important piece of lore. Just what does this really mean though? The creator and preserver? Something awaits at the bottom of the tower, that we know, and the remaining answers will hopefully be answered down there. Sakthing also speaks about various writers, including Paul Ilyua and Sakutaru Hagiwara. Sakutaru Hagiwara once said in a poem, "Uwa, good evening, Uwa, good evening. Ogwa, 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 Uwa, the head of this household is ill." The Uwa and Ogwa noises are meant to replicate the meows of a cat. Hagiwara commonly had cats or cat-like creatures appear in his poems. The significance of this poem is largely up to debate when compared to Baroque itself, but to me the final line speaks the most, claiming the head of this household is ill. When layered over Baroque's narrative, this household could be the Malkuth Order, of which we know the Archangel is the leader of thanks to Nekthing, as he refers to Archangel as Lord Archangel, a term given to a superior and of great respect. Sticking to this line, according to Toshiko Ellis, a professor at the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences in Tokyo, the poem is said by two black cats. Black cats are often quite indistinguishable from one another, so to stretch the reasons why the poem was said here, maybe the poem is instead meant to be said by the members of the Malkuth Order, who are all now in a similar state of distortion and similarity thanks to what may just be the apocalyptic event. Their distortion, especially in mind, makes many of them commonly insane, or something akin to such. So, what is this apocalyptic event? Well, back in that FMV I critiqued at the start of the video, we see a huge and blinding light. This must be a clue. The Archangel, as mentioned, talks to you before each run when handing you the rifle. One of his lines states that following the Great Heat Wave, the sky was always red. This must be the name of the apocalyptic event. Now we have the empty jars labelled with various terminology. Great Heat Wave, Creator and Preserver, the Malkuth Order, etc. We must fill in these jars with the answers related to the characters and events that occurred. As one of the best videos about this game starts with, Baroque is all about pain. Every character is in some sort of torment or terror, and it's up to us to figure out why the world is in the way it is, and if we can fix it. Even with all these questions though, Baroque is quite fun to play. Between the discussed elements of randomization and the lingering story and lore questions, it is quite easy to encourage yourself to keep pressing on, even if you die and lose a lot of progress. Death is a means to learn, but it's also a chance to acquire gear that you can send back to the surface. It also literally advances the plot of the game if you've met the requirements to do so, since your last death, because death causes things to change within the game depending on what you've done. What Baroque lacks in relative complexity in its gameplay, it has in its incredible story, which, yes, I still haven't gone over fully because there is no point doing that when I still have a good amount of, well, game to go over. Oftentimes roguelikes will punish you for experimenting, but its randomization will go against it because sometimes there is simply too much content, so the randomization becomes incredibly, well, overwhelming, and you aren't sure what to take from your failures. Baroque though actually has a small amount of enemies and items, so it's very easy to remember what item does what thing or what enemy does what action. Some may argue that it's okay to have an overwhelming amount of content because content is content. It's always good to have more stuff to do in games. I agree, but sometimes it's good to have an experience that knows what it is, whether that is within its technical limitations or because of the vision of the creators. I would rather have a 10-hour masterpiece that is consistent in its tone and gameplay than a 100-hour game that is all over the place and does nothing but fry my dopamine receptors. I am personally looking at the many Vampire Survivor clones. This point somewhat comes from a place of hypocrisy because I have an insane amount of hours in a certain MMO. Anyway, to the Nerve Tower once more. There is something that needs to be done at the bottom of the tower with the Angelic Rifle, as the Archangel has said. Again, dying will have you return to the outer world without your items, XP and weapons, unless you've thrown them into a sensophere in the tower, which causes them to appear on the surface. By now, I have covered the gameplay quite thoroughly, but I'll go over much of the rest of the grotesques and interactables you can find along the way until more story beats come up. Entering the tower in the real world will cause a group of winged angelic insects to fly at you, with the word suffering appearing on the screen. It isn't revealed yet, but I'll plant the seeds of their lore now by mentioning their names, Littles. You won't see the Littles again for a while. Early on in the tower you will find an often neglected room. Upon entering, a face will appear on the screen. The same face seen in the early cutscene inside the tank the protagonist is birthed from, prior to the simulation's end. Maybe the protagonist is haunted by this face for one reason or another. 17 are swift-moving, wheeled grotesques that charge towards you to both damage and knock you back. If they remain in range, they will do a heavy melee attack. Sekonpo are similar-looking grotesques that are, in my opinion, one of the largest threats that you will come across. They have a move where they will spin around and hit you rapidly for high damage. It is best to throw damaging items at them if you don't want your HP to be drained. If you look closely, they have frogs on top of them that can spit acidic flames which actually degrade your equipment. There are ways to fix them, but throwing damaged items to a Crypt Angel will have it repair them. Luckily, the Sekonpo are weak to ice, so if you manage to enchant your weapon with ice, you should be able to handle them swiftly, should they get into melee range. Another thing up their sleeve is that they can drop patterns that can transform your items into entrails. Jerry-Rom are unique in the sense that your best bet is to actually kill them at a distance. Whilst this is due to their melee damage, they can actually explode and kill themselves whilst doing massive damage to everything nearby. It's a good idea to lead them to other enemies before this happens. They come in a regular size and a mini size, but the regular size Jerry-Rom have a massive difference in both HP and XP. So it is best to use the regular ones as bombs due to the difficulty in handling them in a ranged battle. Around this point you will find another NPC called Eliza, who, upon approach, will back away through an illusionary wall that you can walk through. Following, she'll tell you to do something to do with a sense sphere, but ultimately cannot. This is just a projection and she struggles to maintain this communication. She asks to see you again in the further depths of the nerve tower. She floats in place. Thanks to the layering on her sprites, it creates a simulation of physics in her clothing. I previously spoke about the existence of the sprites in Baroque, but one must appreciate just how good they look, especially when contrasted with the 3D environments they are in. Another character in the early floors is Alice, who, like Elijah, floats and isn't hostile. Alice is near a sense sphere too, meaning that you can throw items to the surface. I actually want to get back to these two more later on because their lore is quite confusing without additional context. If you know me and how my videos work, I typically leave things for later on, and they make the most sense story-wise. If I cover everything as they appear fully, then you, as the viewer, will get very lost. This especially applies to this game. Baroque's lore isn't terribly complicated on its own, but it's told in a way that can come across as confusing and convoluted. It's basically told out of order. Box Thing is another friendly NPC you'll meet. At first he seems like just another distorted NPC with some sort of guilt, but his obsession is to do with another NPC. Box Thing, as his name implies, is obsessed with a box in his hand. If you give him an item that falls within the box category, he will reward you with a random item. But what is his deal? Well, some of his dialogue suggests he wishes to find what the pretend angels found. This is most likely referring to the Malkuth Order and the Archangel who is in charge of it. Whatever they found will, according to him, unseal the box and allow him to reunite with what is inside it. So here's the thing. He claims that he wishes to have died instead of his daughter, and his daughter was very special to him. He believes his daughter is inside this box of his. He dreams about his daughter and that she is being strangled. He drops a piece of lore here too. He describes this box as his Baroque. Okay, so what is a Baroque in context to the lore? Well, in the simplest of terms, it is someone who has been overtaken by their delusions, or something that contributes to a delusion. This is stated by Mariko Shimizu, who wrote some other writings related to Baroque. In their most simple forms, they are delusions, or distorted delusions. Some may judge those in Baroque's world for having these sort of delusions, whether they are metaphorical, physical, or otherwise. But one thing you may be able to lean into with this is the theme of escapism. In fact, I think Baroques are a literal allegory for escapism itself. When the world goes to hell, even the smallest things and the smallest attachments can bring joy or even hope. It could be argued that this wouldn't contribute to bettering the state of the world. But most people quite literally aren't able to better themselves enough to do anything that will help the Archangel, just like the protagonist is doing. Even if, at the end of the day, the joy is fleeting and most likely built on false hopes, or as the game says, delusions, at least it makes one happy. Video games could actually be put under this. Does it really contribute to your social and economic status, and does the action of playing them contribute to the world as a whole? Most likely no. But does it make you happy, inspired, or wishful of art that in itself does influence for the betterment of mankind in many ways? Yes. It's all about inspiration and happiness. What one activity or action does may eventually lead to a wider contribution to the world, and if it doesn't, that's okay. Not everything needs to be a social contribution. Sometimes it's okay to just be happy and to just seek happiness, especially in a world gone to hell. In this world gone to hell, the one that we live in. However, the largest thing to keep in mind in Baroque is that the Baroques themselves can distort and mutate those that depend on them too much. Hence why those such as Boxthing look the way they do, although this may also be because of the Great Heatwave, which massively distorted pretty much everything in the world to some degree. Without this fact, the escapism would make the most sense. But because escapism quite literally mutates the mind and body in the game, it's best to use Baroques, or more simply escapism, responsibly. One cannot blame someone for creating their own Baroques, but they are trapped in this world to some degree either way, because it will eventually cause them to distort. This brings them back to reality, of course. The Great Heatwave itself distorted the world, but the survivors would have been distorted either way by committing the act of escapism amongst themselves too much. These are distorted delusions. These are Baroques. So, about Boxthing. It may be clear to some of you who've been listening, but yes, Boxthing is Sackthing's father. When the world distorted thanks to the Great Heatwave we've heard little about at this point, he seemingly tried to kill her, seeing it as a better outcome than becoming what she is today in the world's current state. This is a testament to just how bad things were getting and eventually got in Baroque's world. Would a father who truly loved his daughter kill her for being different in a world that is already largely destroyed? Well, it could be argued he couldn't be blamed for this. Seemingly his attempted killing of Sackthing happened before the apocalypse finalized, which means that he didn't really fully know what they and the world would become. A sort of panic, perhaps. He is a member of the Order of Malkuth, who are the ones who are close to this apocalyptic omen. Or at least the ones that know most about it. Maybe he really did know what would become of people after the Great Heatwave that destroyed humanity. Even then though, is it a mercy to kill your own daughter to prevent her existence in this world, even if the Archangel seems to be working to reverse it? No one can really judge a situation until they've literally been in those shoes, which none of us have. All we can do is simulate these experiences and go from there. Either way, Baroque proves itself as a painful and disturbing story through these sorts of situations. Another few NPCs you can find are members of the Grotesque Kill Team who have lost their way in the tower. These are, as the name suggests, members of the Malkuth Order tasked with killing Grotesques. Their mission at this point in time though is a little more complicated than that. One such member is Urim and Thummim, who is a person that has been distorted to have a head on their shoulder, which finishes their sentences for them. This is a result of two people standing close together when the Great Heatwave occurred. The body is Thummim and the shoulder is Urim. They describe their ultimate mission right now to find the traitor, the Guardian Angel. What exactly she did isn't known at this time, but Urim and Thummim recognize you as a member of the Coriel. This brings us to another NPC you can find. Eventually you will come across a Coriel member. As a reminder, by this point, you have learned via dialogue that these are essentially former members of Malkuth who went against the organization, a rebel sect if you will. These members can be encountered multiple times throughout the tower, but they all share similar voice lines. Familiarity rings in their voices, and they state that they thought you had been killed. They ask you to kill them, as they cannot move at all thanks to the confinement caskets they've been wrapped in. It can also be learned from the Coriel members that there are 12 in total, including the main character, making their official name number 12. I will continue to call them the protagonist or you, but also number 12 in places. Now we can start to piece some things together. The main character has committed a sin, and they were a part of the rebel Coriel sect who went against the Malkuth. Now, what exactly was the goal of the Coriel, and why were they punished so badly? And why is the main character the one who has to atone for the sin of the Coriel? Well, we can also gather from these Coriel members that the Archangel interfered with a process called the Dabar, better known as the Dabar fusion. They question if the global distortion of the world is the result of this, and whether or not the protagonist remembers it at all. Amidst the Coriel members' begging, he says the following: "As the world started to slowly distort, the Archangel insisted that the Creator and Preserver was going to destroy us, but we couldn't believe it. That is why we undertook the Dabar. I remember that time." The Dabar was a sort of process to either prove the Archangel wrong in his mission to do something to this Creator, or it was a response to it. Yet another mystery Baroque gives you, but at least things are slowly unraveling still. Another thing the Coriel says is, "We wanted to hear the God of creation and preservation's true intentions. That is why you fused with God, so that God could share its thoughts with us through your mouth." Of course, we know that the protagonist lost most of their memories, including their activities within the Coriel, because again, number 12, the protagonist was a member of the Coriel. Like many things, this only becomes clearer with time, but we know the Coriel are being punished. The fusion of the protagonist, number 12, and God seems to be referred to as the Dabar fusion, and the Coriel's efforts to do so led to them being punished. This must be the sin of the protagonist the Archangel is referring to, tampering with God to the degree that the Archangel had to interfere. Is this what made the world what it is today, his interference? Perhaps the Archangel blames himself deep down, but instead chooses to wholly blame number 12 and have him descend the tower. The thing is about these NPCs and their exposition is that they can actually be missed entirely. In some of my early runs, I never met the Coriel member, nor Alice and Eliza. It's a good idea to look very thoroughly through levels, even if you don't think you'll benefit from doing so, because the lore is largely told through these optional encounters, which again are always going to be on specific floors, despite the other randomization elements in the game. If you want to actually not miss story beats, you best look around or just follow the progression guide on the Nerve Tower website. The Coriel member asks you to kill him, or more specifically, purify him. We know from hitting the Crypt Angel that the simple act of attacking things causes purification. This is why the grotesques vanish the way they do instead of becoming a bloody mess on the ground. This ability can also be blamed for the existence of the Idea Sephira. As a reminder, we learned from Coffin Man that these are the small orbs that appear after killing an enemy that restores VT. NPCs also have their own Idea Sephira. Their items aren't included in their purification process because they simply were not a part of their literal body. Another thing to consider is flesh, the item that is. If grotesques are purified and their entire bodies are seemingly obliterated from reality when they do, why do they drop entrails? Well, the Nerve Tower website proposes a theory on their own analysis called the origins of flesh. We know that the protagonist is cloned with every run, and the grotesques don't attack each other, meaning that there isn't anything in the tower that can kill them besides the protagonist's purification ability. So, a theory is that these entrails are from the clones of the protagonist, also known as Coriel number 12. Another reason this theory makes sense is that the further you go down the tower, the smarter the flesh comes. Flesh comes in different rarities, being idiot, average, and genius. Of course, this hints that the further one is into the tower, the smarter they are, which makes complete sense. One could argue the flesh could be sourced from grotesques because of the kill team, but here is why I think this isn't true. The kill team only appear on the upper floors, yet you still encounter flesh on the bottom floors. So if that were the case, the flesh would only appear on the upper floors. I'm looking at you, person who is writing a comment right now, how I am wrong, or should I say, the Nerve Tower is wrong. But what are the Idea Sephira really? It is somewhat complicated. Their appearance itself, being crystalline and pearl-like, is more than likely inspired by a type of pearl called a Baroque. Well, less so a type and more like a shape. A Baroque pearl is a designation of pearl that are asymmetrical and unique in its shape. This isn't seen as a flaw, but rather a characteristic. These pearls can be found near water, both fresh and salty, and offer their own spectrum of colours and form. And here we have yet another loose connection on the inspiration and analysis of these pearls in Baroque. Idea Sephirots also go by another term, pure water. Water, of course, being where pearls are found in general. Mind-reading thing straight up tells you what they are in their simplest form. The core of an individual person. Their data, if you will. But if this is the case, why do grotesques have Sephira? It may be obvious to some. They aren't typical mythical beasts formed out of nothing. We know that the distortion of the world caused massive deformities in living things, including humans. Grotesques are essentially humans who have been massively distorted to the point where they barely, or in most cases, no longer at all show human features. This is why they drop something intended for an individual person. They could also exist for animals, but this isn't really confirmed anywhere, and Mind Reading Thing did say that they are the core of a person rather than a living thing. Maybe Box Thing's fear was Sack Thing becoming a grotesque all along. Of course, his attempted murder of his daughter happened before the Great Heatwave, but remember, he was a member of the Order of Malkuth, so perhaps he was aware of the adverse effects it would have had, not just on the world but on people too. This idea also contributes to the entire argument of whether or not he was justified. Maybe if she also knew what would come of her, she would have allowed some sort of euthanasia. There isn't really any way of knowing. Pressing forward with your mission, you'll most likely come to a situation where you need to use the angelic rifle. As mentioned, it has 5 rounds and eliminates anything in a single shot, even giving you the XP from the enemy you kill. Many emergency situations will arrive, especially in the deepest depths of the nerve tower. One grotesque that I mostly used the rifle on were the just go with that, fuck it. These grotesques have a huge amount of HP and no defined weaknesses, but their offensive abilities are what make them a massive threat. They can fire and surround themselves with electricity, and like the Jerry Rom, they can explode to kill themselves and everything around them. Like the Jerry Rom, they can also cause friendly fire, with not just their self-destruction but also their electricity. Either way though, in a 1 versus 1 situation, it's best to keep your distance and just throw items at them. If you are trapped between 2 of them in, say, a corridor, it's worth using the angelic rifle to kill one so you can escape safely. Speaking of corridors, one such grotesque that actually outright blocks a corridor until you approach is the Sun. Sun are these spider-like grotesques that attach to a green web of slimy material. To pass by, you must hit them so they suspend themselves. It's still important to be careful whilst they're in this state though, as they will still fire projectiles. Whilst crawling around though, they will attempt to jump on your face like a face hugger. Eventually they will drop off and their corpse will exude a sort of gas that causes the lethargy status. Overall though, you'll be rather unlucky to have to pass by one in order to descend to the next floor. Like with many grotesques, throw items until they die if you don't want to spend too much HP dealing with them. Oddly, they have quite a large amount of HP for their size. There is another grotesque that blocks hallways, but I'm actually going to leave it out. In fact, I am leaving a handful of grotesques out of this video. Why is this? Well, I would like to leave some things up in the air for you if you want to play the game. There aren't that many grotesques overall though. Luckily, they are very varied. Liars are grotesques that give you the lust effect. As the Nerve Tower website states, the writer of the game confirmed that liars were once people who kept secrets close to them and often were manipulative, becoming withdrawn if things didn't go their way. Essentially a mix of narcissists and the sort. With this in mind, we can come up with many theories or research the grotesques in greater detail. For example, Glero may have been thieves, Bulger were perhaps gluttonous, 17 may have been athletes, and Jerry Rom may have literally been children. I mean, hell, they make sounds that sound like children. There is more to the creation process of the grotesques, but I'll get to it when I talk about the Archangel more. The last NPC for this run I will go over is in an isolated room. This is the Guardian Angel, another member of the Order of Malkuth who has seemingly been consumed by guilt, and the person the kill team are looking for. For now, this mother figure will stand in front of a sense sphere which, according to her, stores memories of her own sins, as she hasn't had the courage to confess them to anyone else. In her own words, she is a worthless coward. The Guardian Angel is very important for the story of the Archangel, but in your initial meeting nothing more will happen, so for now I will move on. Just to plant the seed, she looks after littles. You know, those cherub-like creatures that fly at you when you enter the tower. Eventually you will reach floor 13. At first, this floor is similar to the last few because yes, the tower does change in texture and appearance to signify how deep you are. This time though, there is no portal to the next floor. Rather, you will come across a room with perhaps the most iconic imagery for this game across the entire internet. YouTubers love this for thumbnails. Not me though, I'm original, I think, maybe. This is the true state of the Archangel, pierced on a sense sphere and left to suffer. This is due to the Great Heatwave, or as he describes it more literally, the Wrath of God. He wants number 12 to go to the bottom layer through the sense sphere he is pierced on to do away with his sin. This sin, according to the Archangel, is the act of making the creator and preserver, being God, mad. The protagonist, number 12, a clone of many, made God mad and caused the Great Heatwave? Interesting. The Archangel says the only way to cure your sin is by purifying God yourself. Yes, that's right. Not with our standard weaponry, but with the angelic rifle. By the way, just as a side note, be sure to kill everything on this floor, or at least everything that you've entered combat with. They will follow you into this room and make the dialogue quite hard to follow. Either way, pressing onward to the sense sphere, you will enter the bottom layer. The Archangel talks to you through the sense sphere. He claims that you have no past to preserve yourself, and he has no pain to preserve himself. Whatever this means isn't quite clear, but what is clear is his instruction to not get too close to God, because doing so will drive you mad. God itself takes on the form of a biomechanical woman tied to some sort of pulsating machinery, resembling a heartbeat. The environment itself is otherworldly, almost like a simulation to represent the absolute otherworldliness of not just the situation itself, but also the fact that God's presence is embedded here. There are two things you can do here. One is to follow the instruction of the Archangel and fire the angelic rifle at God, and the other is to go against his instruction and approach God instead. This is the exact reason why the angelic rifle was given to you. If you have no ammo, you really have no choice but to approach God. Some may think that these are two paths to enter the game, which, well, kind of. Technically they are conclusions, but you are missing a good half of the game's story if you stop playing after doing either of these things. Plus, doing either of these things results in the same thing, although through different methods. Attempting to merge with God by approaching it will have the protagonist seemingly embrace it. However, a large amount of lore is spelled out during this interaction. We find out that number 12 had a brother. There are actually hints to this prior to this point, but they are somewhat vague, which is why I've not really mentioned it until now. For example, I mentioned some time back that early in the depths of the Nerve Tower, you can find a room which will have a face appear on the screen, being the same face inside the tank that the clones are birthed from. This implies that the protagonist, despite being cloned many times, still remembers their brother to some capacity. But why? Well, we learn too through Sakthing, as a reminder, she hears everything from words to thoughts of those around her, that the protagonist and the other were screaming at the time of surgery, stating you didn't want to live if it meant killing a part of yourself. Tearing apart implies that you and your twin were actually conjoined. If you don't know what this means, sometimes twins are born physically connected. Some share a heart, whilst others may have two. Their anatomy varies heavily. It is an incredibly rare phenomenon. If you don't believe this off these words alone, hell, look at this official piece of art. It literally shows number 12 and their twin connected in one body. Judging by Sakthing's words, the protagonist must feel immense survivor's guilt. But the cutscenes that play upon shooting or merging with God confirms this fact. They proclaim that they should have died instead of their twin, and they feel responsible for their death. Oddly, too, they say they murdered the world. Is this their sin? Shooting God will result in its purification, and a voice talks to you directly, stating that it wanted to become one with you once again. Whether this is from God or the twin isn't too clear due to the complete lack of voice lines, but to me this is somehow the dead twin talking to his brother, or vice versa. The cutscene here, too, suggests that the protagonist gains the idea Sephira of God itself. Gripping the pearl-like object that represents such, the Archangel seeks it so he may create and preserve a new world alongside Number 12. Number 12, though, rejects him, stating that the world just needs one more chance, and the new world headed by the Archangel sounds awful. From here, the world is remade to a point by Number 12. There is one key difference though. This time, his twin takes his place. His survivor guilt was simply too much. However, this also means his twin would go on to feel this very same guilt. The reason why Number 12 didn't recreate an entirely new world isn't truly known, but the dialogue suggests that the power of God's idea Sephira is limited. As the Archangel states outright, there is no way for Number 12 to create a new world all by himself. Whether this is a lie or not isn't clear because the Archangel also wanted to create a new world, but he seemingly intended to do it alongside Number 12. Whether this is a way to manipulate Number 12 to follow his goal is up to debate. Maybe Number 12 loves the world as it once was so much to the point that he wishes to squeeze the possibilities of it returning dry, and allowing his twin to take his place so he may live a normal life. So why exactly was the protagonist split apart from their twin anyway? Why is it heavily implied we are responsible for the world state? These things are still in the air at this point. But the game is over, no? Well, no. As I said, this is basically half the game. There are very specific things you must do to achieve the true ending of Baroque. They heavily involve the guardian angel as well as the twins Elijah and Alice, being the two women that you may encounter on your way to God. Essentially, Baroque as a game is somewhat of a puzzle. To even finish it, you must go out your way to interact with certain characters and complete their objectives, but you will only realize such after either purifying God or merging with them. Again, merging with them causes the same thing to happen. The merge allows Number 12 to restart the universe once more and give it another chance. For the true ending, you can't just go from the top of the nerve tower to the bottom. Before that though, I want to go through some of the spin-offs that build upon the base game. There are games, a manga, and a visual novel. Luckily, none of them take place after the true ending of the game, so now is a good time to go through them. After all of that is over, I will show you what awaits at the end of the game. Alright, the manga. This is a first for this channel, but I've read plenty of manga in my time outside of it. It was published between 2000 and 2002, which is before the remake's release on the Wii and the PlayStation 2, meaning that it somewhat follows the story of the original game on the Sega Saturn. Yes, the manga is somewhat of an adaptation of the game's story. It is 17 chapters long, so it's actually quite short for a manga. However, reading this manga without knowing much about the game is like taking an infant child and throwing them into the deep end of a swimming pool. That being, it's incredibly confusing without the context of the game, at least at first. Like the game, it starts off as vague, and as time goes on, it slowly cleans itself up. One thing I would say though is that the manga does somewhat ruin the element of figuring out the plot yourself, which is pretty much the only slow burn element of Baroque, and arguably the best part about it. The manga becomes quite literal when it wants to be. But again, it doesn't really follow the game to a T, which I will go into. Despite Shinshu Ueda, the mangaka, being quite experienced in not just art but seemingly as a fan of Baroque itself, the manga is not canon. I must say again, this isn't canon, the manga isn't canon. However, what it can be used for is to clarify things that are at best interpreted. Because we've ran through much of the game's plot so far, I will be skipping over the stuff we already know, mentioning new information and just things that I feel like should be pointed out, especially things that I feel like work if they were canon. I think it's totally inconsequential though whether you read it or not, because again, it's just not canon. I will be using it to introduce things yet to be discussed, because the game itself, whilst mentioning certain events, doesn't necessarily show them. I am basically using the manga as a tool to give better imagery to certain events, but to also use it to give a better understanding of the events that went down that aren't explicitly shown. I am also going to say right now that I am not going through the entire manga. I will go into why once I'm near the end of this section, but what I will say right now is that the various translations that exist are very inconsistent, so depending on it for a critical analysis and expansion of the game is very difficult to do, even if it was very loyal to the game, which it isn't at all, especially near the end. The manga's art style immediately lets itself known on the cover of the first volume, and I actually really like it. It fits the game and somewhat reminds me of Hellsing, not just because it's edgy, but because of the line work and general tone. The new illustrations for each character in this manga are seriously great and very loyal to the game as well. The first chapter opens on number 12 inside the nerve tower, being followed by a Kato being trapped between another before eventually being killed. Very loyal to the gameplay experience firstly, but secondly, I love how terrified number 12 looks. Whilst his emotions are put on display through his guilt of surviving the separation from his twin, it's also just really nice to get an idea just how terrifying the nerve tower really is. Number 12 isn't a mindless clone. He feels, has an inner goal, a past, and all that makes someone human, even amidst a distorted world. This number 12 wasn't in a simulation though. It was just another of the endless clones that have been made to go into the nerve tower. For a while, the manga goes how the game does, beginning a simulation and being told by the imposing sentry angel to continue to the nerve tower. Number 12's confusion is shown here too, outright questioning what a nerve tower is. This is an advantage the manga has over the game. You can regularly see number 12's thoughts. Remember, number 12 cannot speak throughout the course of Baroque, with only his brief thoughts flashing upon the screen, and very rarely that is. I think literally only a few times in the entire game. Meanwhile in the manga he does it quite often, which is very nice. Malkuth Order tapestries are spread throughout the Outer Worlds town, and soon enough number 12 finds the NPCs featured in the game. He doesn't question who they are, but rather what they are. Number 12 has no idea what is going on. Every single number 12 clone is a blank slate for the Archangel, and by extension the Order of Malkuth to manipulate. The Horned Woman and the Coffin Man show their characteristics too, with the Coffin Man taking a more direct approach by vaguely introducing his tutorial dungeon, but also pointing to the Archangel, just like in the game. The Archangel refers to the other members of Malkuth as fools, and straight up tells number 12 that he is responsible for the world becoming the way it is. The nerve tower is then introduced, with the Archangel leading number 12 to it, and referring to it as the Church of the Malkuth Order. As you can see, the manga is way more literal than the game. In the very first chapter, the Archangel outright confirms the nerve tower hosts God at the bottom, and number 12 must purify it. He doesn't really do this in the game and instead is quite vague, up until the point you find him impaled on the sense sphere near the bottom. Number 12 describes a dull pain to himself for guilt eating away at him. Despite being cloned, it seems his survivor's guilt remains. Why is this? Well, simple, so the Archangel can use it to manipulate him by telling him it's because of his sin, which led to the world being distorted. This applies to the game as well. The Archangel goes into detail about the Great Heatwave. It didn't just mangle and change people, but also the environment. Eventually they reach the bottom because remember, this is a simulation, and the simulation is a compressed version of reality. Number 12 lines up the angelic rifle on his shoulder to shoot. Yeah, on his shoulder. It's nice to have an actual scale to this thing. It really isn't a rifle, it's more like a railgun. In that moment though, the Guardian Angel briefly appears in a hologram and tells him not to shoot. With increased hesitation, number 12 eventually fires, and the simulation ends, with the Archangel telling him to burn his mission into his brain. The various distorted ones in the town watch as number 12 receives his mission once more by the Archangel, only this time it's the real world. This time the Archangel does not follow him into the nerve tower. From here we are shown some members of the Order of Malkuth inside the laboratory that the Sentry Angel guards, being where each clone is made. They watch from a distance and acknowledge that there isn't really a way to simply send number 12 to the bottom. They also mention an extermination unit that they've lost contact with. This, of course, refers to the grotesque kill team. Instead of doing Coffin Man's dungeon, the tutorial this time is carried out by Alice, one of the floating women found in the nerve tower who are important for the true ending of the game. Her personality is quite different from the game, being a lot more energetic. She is hurt that number 12 has forgotten who she is as well because one of his clones has previously met her. Whilst injecting himself with a healing item, number 12 expresses hurt. And this is where Alice tells him that we don't understand pain, referring to her twin Eliza. She tells number 12 of the Littles, and compares their suffering to the thoughts of various grotesques in the Nerve Tower via an ideosephora. The Littles feel nothing but pain and suffering, hence why these words flash on your screen in the game when you enter the Nerve Tower and see them. Shortly after, number 12 is ambushed and killed. He wakes up and soon meets Alice again. This time though, number 12 realizes that it's okay if he dies because technically he cannot. This is despite him getting his memory wiped. A delusion perhaps, or hell, maybe even a Baroque of sorts. This is a form of Baroque introduced in the manga. Remember, one such definition of Baroque introduced so far in the game is a delusion, or a form of escapism to help cope with one's reality. However, his thoughts aren't completely a form of cope. He knows his memory is wiped, he knows he cannot remember anything except the fact he committed a sin, and he knows the only one that can truly guide him this far is the Archangel. He is essentially stuck. Without the Archangel, he is truly lost, even if the Archangel is a malicious force who has sent him into an endless loop of confusion, life, and death. Alice sees his position and decides to go with him. From here we get a cutaway to the prior mentioned extermination team, who are looking for the Guardian Angel. Funny enough, the way the two progress down the tower are elevators. Quite different from the portals found in the game, but I think it would have been very difficult for them to code elevators and make them at least a little seamless. One thing I also want to mention during the many fight scenes featured in the manga is the scale of the grotesques. It's quite hard to figure out just how big they are in the game itself, but the grotesques in the Lost Paradigm, which is the name of the manga by the way, are quite terrifying and imposing. During these fights, number 12 becomes progressively tired and hurt, just like in the game. Whilst Alice seeks to help number 12, she soon realizes it would be very difficult to retain the same sort of connection they have if he ends up dying and subsequently getting his mind wiped. Now, this is where things get a little weird and off course from the game. I will try to keep it brief from this point on, especially if it means I'm discussing things that aren't canon. Again, I'm using the manga to give a better idea of the things in the game itself. Alice and number 12 meet a character who is seemingly a part of the extermination team looking for the Guardian Angel. He claims that number 12 is called Dextera. Yeah, an actual name. Does it matter? No, and I'm not sure why the manga decides to include this. It's extremely out of the blue. Anyway, moving on. He tells the two that the Archangel hasn't been physically seen since the Great Heatwave itself, and uses the sense spheres to project images of himself to give instructions. This we know already. He claims the Order of Malkuth helped preserve the world, with the sense spheres acting as organs of God to filter out the twisted parts of it. A filter, if you will. This is immensely important to remember. By this point, the grotesques were very few in number thanks to the Malkuth's experimentation. Exterminators would hunt them down whenever they were birthed, and the reason why they began existing is because of God's weakening mind and body. Again, we see the Great Heatwave and its effects on the Malkuth Order. The Archangel orders them to find number 12 and bring him to the research station on the surface near the tower. We know too the right hand of the Archangel, the Guardian Angel, vanished after the heatwave. After telling him of this, the man is told by an image of the Archangel to help him reach the lowest level. We learn his name is number 47. Yeah, it's very different from the game in some places, which is why I'm not going to go through the whole thing. Soon they reach God once more, and it is purified by number 12. Like in the game, the world is reset by number 12, giving it one last chance. And this is where I stop going through the manga, because I want to use the game itself when the time comes, to cover the last points of the game. Again, the manga isn't canon, and contrasting it with the game is just confusing. Either way, the manga is a good individual experience, and it's best to go into it not fully expecting a loyal adaptation of the game, but an adaptation nonetheless. I'm actually quite a large fan of the original ideas it presents, but ultimately it will hurt a video like this if I went through it fully. Having to mention what is and isn't canon all the time or contradicting what happens in the manga with the game will just make the video incredibly convoluted. If you want to read it yourself, just look it up. You might get something out of it, but remember, it isn't canon, and actually diverts from the game quite a lot around the end. It isn't a bad manga, it is just different from the game. Baroquism Syndrome, not to be confused with Baroque Syndrome, is a sort of prequel novella that was featured in Sega Saturn's promotional magazine written by Mariko Shimizu, and is what was later adapted into Baroque Syndrome. Baroquism Syndrome is actually canon. What bridges the gap between the game and the writings is another short story called Baroque Interludium. This section is only truly possible thanks to the Nerve Tower website. They admit that it would be extremely cumbersome and possibly violate copyright to create and publish a full and complete translation of the visual novel, but what does exist are translations of the writings it is based off. During this section, you'll see a source at the bottom of the screen every time I start a chapter. I'm not reading directly from the chapters, I'm simply putting the translation into a more understandable form. I've taken liberties to summarize and analyze than straight up read. Because the writings were published before Baroque's release and are prequels to such, none of them outright spoils the events of the game, but they massively enrich the events of the game. I will be largely referring to the writings of Baroquism Syndrome whilst using visuals from Baroque Syndrome. To remind you, Baroquism Syndrome are the writings the visual novel is based off, being Baroque Syndrome. This was by far the hardest part of the video to put together, but it's definitely worth it because the prequel content of this game is massively neglected on YouTube. Baroquism Syndrome has 3 volumes. The first volume begins with a first-person narrator in the days following the Great Heatwave. He describes the Malkuth prayer is silent, more specifically the one of the grotesque kill team. He fears of Baroques, of delusion. It's soon revealed that he is writing an email to someone, curious of what the world would be like when it first began to distort, and if the world could ever be saved. This email is largely how the story is told. He writes about a girl, Yumi Anzai, 15 years old. She played a key role in a murder called the after-school rooftop murder. A testimony of a student states that someone had fell from the top of the roof, a male student. Yumi was soon seen pushing through the crowd to talk to the corpse. Her childhood friend she referred to as Ta-chan. She would kneel to rip the dead boy's eyeballs out to everyone's surprise. She claimed them to be beautiful, taking them with her. It was soon confirmed that Yumi was the one who pushed the boy, leading to her eventual arrest. The media would soon blow up with the story, with Yumi's lawyer pleading insanity. Up until this point, she was quite normal and unremarkable with a stable family. She liked music, had no particularly close friends, and overall wasn't too unusual. Her relationship with Ta-chan was just a friendship and nothing more. It wasn't a sort of lover's quarrel gone bad. The media, though, would say otherwise for the sake of clicks. When questioned about her motives, Yumi did answer, but the contents of the interview were redacted. The one writing the email detailing these events managed to get the documents though. Yumi wanted someone's eyes, anyone's really, but only the dead would have been able to do so because no living person would give up their eyes. She considered asking her parents for theirs, but Ta-chan was unlucky enough to be there on that day. Initially asking him, Ta-chan would be shocked and began telling her she's only trying to be unique or quirky. He wasn't saying this out of malice, more so care and worry. He may have developed feelings for her after all. He asked Yumi why she doesn't want to rip her own eyeballs out, and she says that her eyes aren't good enough and are just nerve endings of a sense ball. Before Ta-chan could reassure her further, he was shoved by Yumi. The psychiatrist that interviewed her wished that the shoving was just because Ta-chan was swearing at her, but no, it was deeper than that. This talk about sense balls suggests that something else was going on, presuming Yumi wasn't just insane. Yumi hinted that him swearing at her multiple times in their confrontation was enough of an excuse for her to take his eyes, a sort of compensation. The interviewer would ask Yumi straight, why does she want eyes? Yumi bluntly would say because they are beautiful and advanced forms of sense balls. There's that word again, which is extremely similar to sense sphere. Yumi explains that eyes are different forms of sense balls because they observe whatever they look at. They are simple, obedient, and pure. The sense balls that Yumi speaks of aren't. They are always monitoring everything rather than being obedient and controlled like eyeballs. Yumi explained that sense balls are everywhere, but only few can see them. If you touch one, you will learn the truth behind the world, but nothing good will come from that. The interviewer would then summarize the interview. Quote, Yumi Anzai believes that the entire world is being monitored by sense balls, and that she gained awareness of their existence after becoming fused with one such sense ball. These appear to be typical symptoms of paranoid schizophrenia. Unquote. Yumi would be prosecuted despite her lawyer's insanity plea. From here, we jump 72 days after the school incident to another case of death, Yumi herself. Inside her stomach was a strange sphere which had an abnormal cell structure not found in humans. The sphere would be retrieved and kept by a think tank group for research. The writer of these emails questions if Yumi really did fuse with a sense ball, which he now acknowledges as sense spheres. Remember, sense balls seem to be minor versions of sense spheres. The latter seem to be always monitoring and receiving information and used for many reasons, from communication to transferring items. The writer acknowledges that his investment into this case may be a Baroque on its own, a sort of escapism in hopes of finding out the truth of the world. He confirms, too, that he isn't a member of the Malkuth Order. Yumi's case was the first of the Baroque murders, and they occurred a few years back before the protagonist of Baroquism Syndrome would write these emails. The skull case may have been a stimulus of Baroque becoming a sort of buzzword. Whether it was because of the media or otherwise isn't fully known. From here, the writer details another case in his email, the boys and the girls' irregular suicide case. He details a suicide note written by a 17-year-old boy who blames his stalker, Miss Rumi Kaihara. According to him, she had stalked him, physically assaulted him, and burned his possessions. She stole his pet dog too and would call him to repeat the phrase, "For I possess all that you possess." Rumi was the same age as him. Here's the twist though. Rumi didn't do any of these things. He did these things to her. Rumi had a severe eating disorder, which was apparently caused by the boy force-feeding her mysterious meat, which may have been the remains of his missing dog. Another suicide case happened around this point, this time a girl. She confessed of her affair with a famous musician, but the musician didn't have any idea who she was. However, he was shocked to see how much she knew about him. Overall, 73 boys and girls committed suicide within a very close time. They left behind distorted delusions, one even claiming to be a superhero and another one claimed to be a child of sin born from incest. Doctors would be confused by this, penning it as a Baroque, the same buzzword founded from the Yumi case. This would increase headlines, with the word Baroque exploding in the population. It was used as another word for deluded, someone who has been imprisoned by their delusions and escapism, to the point of being decayed in mind and also body. From here, some people would make Baroques their business. The writer of these emails would reveal himself to be one of these people. His name is Kitsune Kanazawa, or Kitsune if you are American. We exit now from this computer screen and to the real world. Kitsune runs the Baroque shop. As he said, he has somehow made Baroques his business. The topics of these emails he was sending reflects this fact. He is very knowledgeable about Baroques and the violent delusions they may form into, and the events that took place that led up to the world's current state. As a reminder, Baroquism Syndrome takes place before the Great Heatwave, but after the world slowly began to distort. He helps a young man named Fumi reacquire a Baroque left in his case, one of violent power fantasies. His hobby, as he admits, is arson, and his Baroque is relevant to this hobby. Kitsune searches for a Baroque of destruction, one sort of fantasy where the entire world burns. Here, Kitsune explains how this all actually works. In exchange for a fee, he creates stories about delusional desires of those who have gone mad or wish to die. Of course, due to the nature of Baroques, this often drives another person to their death. A sort of euthanasia. Despite this, Kitsune takes pride in his work. Revenge is a popular word amongst those who have gone Baroque. Fumi explains that his wish to burn is less out of destruction but more out of purity. Such defined delusions are rare. Most are happy to die or go mad, as long as you give them a story that makes them feel special. Struggling to search for the Baroque Fumi is looking for, Fumi gives him a few keywords to search: sense sphere, angel, tarantella melody, and grotesque. Kitsune is only confused, and Fumi leaves him a disc before leaving, telling him to listen to it. He tells Kitsune that if he listens to it, he will see the world differently. Kitsune knows that listening to a Baroque person's instructions is a bad idea, as you may be encompassed by their delusions and soon go mad like they have. He cannot get the instruction and the keywords out of his head though, and wonders if he really should listen to the disc. Kitsune visits a man called Suzume Suzuki inside a soundproofed room. Kitsune inquires the expert about the disc, and explains that he cannot make it play sound through any normal way. He also tells Suzume about Fumi, who gave him the disc. Before investigating the disc further, Suzume tells Fumi he wants to show him something. He pulls up some data simply entitled Baroque. From here, Kitsune tells us, the reader, that he and Suzume met over the internet. The Great Heat Wave was just the stimulus of the end of the world, and the events of Baroquism Syndrome give a view into the slow decay of the world before that point. So the internet still exists. The two had usernames, being Fox and Sparrow. Suzume works in digital music production, hence why Kitsune went to him regarding the CD he was given by the Baroque Fumi. Going back to the data he found, it is a sense sphere investigation report. It may have leaked thanks to the government themselves going slowly Baroque. It details sense spheres and how those captivated by them see hallucinations and delusions. This causes madness and, on scarce occasions, suicide. A popular theory are sensospheres are organisms that distribute a virus which causes these effects, but this lacks evidence. There has yet been a way to prevent the damage caused by them, but it's possible to detect them from afar without witnessing them. This detection program was called Perception. The file about the man who founded this technology looked weirdly similar to Fumi, who left the disc, but behind the man's shoulders were what looked to be angel wings. Questioning this, Suzume assures they must be fake because, well, it's weird to dress up in such a way for an official document. Kitsune recalls the words Fumi said: sense sphere, angel, and grotesque. Angel in particular is relevant to this image. Sadly, Suzume wasn't able to recover more about this perception program used to find sense spheres, as he was picked up by their security systems and could only get a capture of the current page he was on. Suzume decides to check out the disc that Fumi gave to Kitsune, and after conversation about not worrying about being caught by the government, something began to bother him. Something in the earphones as he listened to the contents of the CD. Soon, Suzume stopped moving and quickly fell into unconsciousness. Kitsune, in a panic, pulled the headphone jack out, and in a small instant, a melody echoed throughout the room before ceasing. For a split second, he saw tiny red spheres all around them, contracting and expanding like beating hearts, almost beckoning him. They soon vanished, and Suzume didn't wake up, despite Kitsune's panic and pleading. 9 hours later, Suzume opened his eyes in the hospital, not remembering his fall. His memory went blank as soon as he began listening to the CD. The only thing he can vaguely remember is a simple melody from the disc, a tarantella melody. One of the keywords that Fumi said. Suzume explained that he felt for a moment that he was everywhere, seeing everything, a sign of going Baroque according to Kitsune. Suzume looked at his hands, extending and contracting his fingers. This reminded Kitsune of what his father did shortly before his death. The feeling of one being everywhere and now only existing in one place has changed him forever. Kitsune explained to Suzume that the contents of the disc removed themselves after playing. Soon after, Kitsune took him home, as he showed no abnormalities according to the hospital. Before they parted their ways, Suzume tells Kitsune he will try to recreate the melody. It would be a long time before Kitsune saw Suzume again. The second volume picks up 65 days after the incident with Suzume and the tarantella melody. Following that, it rained almost non-stop for around 60 days. Kitsune found a girl in his office who he didn't recognize. Asking who she is, she tried to run, but Kitsune managed to catch her as he investigated his workspace. It was untampered by her. She knows Kitsune and introduces herself as Ruby Watanabe, a drifter as she describes herself. Kitsune describes her as short and delicate. Her treasure hunt is for an image of a monster, and that a serial killer responsible for a bunch of cases known as the splatter killings may be said monster. Kitsune brushes it off, but Ruby insists the rumors may be true. She had heard the monster had many depictions from different people, and no one has had a good look at it because they die before they are able to. She is here because someone told her Kitsune may have a picture of it. Kitsune asked her who told her this, and she told him that a Baroque kid named Meg Hasegawa had Kitsune compose a cute Baroque for her about how she was a princess in a previous life. Meg was Ruby's friend. Was because Meg was supposedly a victim of the splatter killings. Kitsune describes the splatter killings as incredibly violent. Corpses that had been diagonally bisected with chunks bitten out of them. They were separated from the Baroque killings because the strength required to do these things to the bodies were beyond human strength. Despite Kitsune knowing the truth of the splatter killings, he brushed Ruby off, insisting it was all but a fairy tale. Out of desperation, Ruby showed Kitsune 2 large blue wounds on her back. Deep wounds, almost like wings had been ripped from her back. Ruby told Kitsune that she was next to Meg when she was killed, and was knocked out shortly after. Ruby trembled, asking Kitsune for the picture of the monster. Kitsune, believing it may be a grotesque thanks to some data he had obtained about such, took Ruby to a dark place of the city called District 0. Ruby was more so guiding him though to the location of the killings. Suzume was to thank when it came to Kitsune having any idea of what a grotesque was. He had an image of the grotesque Ruby may have spoke of. Kitsune wanted Ruby to show her where the incident with the grotesque occurred, and from there he will provide her with more information in the future. Deep down, Kitsune wanted to see the grotesque for himself, rather than through an image. Soon they reached the room where the incident occurred, a cellar. It was all rusted. Meg wasn't the only one who died, as confirmed by Ruby. 3 others died too. Many Baroque kids played here too, being overtaken by delusion to some degree. They were unstable, but Ruby found the unpredictable nature of them thrilling. Kitsune spotted in the corner of his eye what looked to be some praying mantis eggs on the wall, only much larger. Ruby described what it was like when she came back to consciousness after the grotesque attack. Her face was sticky and smelled weird, and a sort of tower that looked like the work of a bloody art with hair and fingers stood over her. Meg's fingers, which she knew thanks to the nail polish. It tore Meg to pieces and piled them up into the shape of a tower. The foamy lumps, which Kitsune referred to as eggs, were slowly multiplying on the walls. The 3 other girls had their throats slit and died whilst Ruby was unconscious. Kitsune snapped Ruby out of her violent reminiscing and told her that they should go. Agreeing, Ruby and Kitsune tried to leave, but the pulsating had multiplied everywhere, even between the door and the wall, trapping them. Here, Ruby remembered that the rumour was that the monster appeared whenever people spoke about it. Here, an inverted, triangular clump of flesh appeared, its head sunken into what would have been a shoulder of a human. 2 skinny arms hung from it, and its fingers were more like talons. A grotesque. Its eyes watched the 2 from within hollow recesses that occupied its head. Luckily, Kitsune had a gun inside his raincoat, but had never fired one. The grotesque towered over him. He could barely make out its once human skull. After a swift dodge from its claws and a tumble, he fired and injured the grotesque whilst Ruby threw a knife Kitsune had given her. They couldn't escape as the material that was growing across the room had still blocked the door. During the fight, Kitsune realized that the grotesque was amorphous, without a solid shape. Firing at a sprinkler before it could attack Ruby, it soon dissolved. Ruby, out of fear, would cuss him out, but the 2 returned to his office soon after. Kitsune pulled up the image to compare it to the one they encountered. They were different. This possibly means that the information Suzume obtained, being the keywords including grotesque, was no longer not so secret. Grotesques were spreading, so more people may have encountered them. Exiting the shop to leave District 0, the two soon came across another figure, this time larger, what looked to be a gigantic newborn baby. It wasn't amorphous like the previous one, but it was filled with malice. Kitsune had no bullets left. The giant baby held a large blade in its hand. Kitsune argued Ruby to run, but she couldn't as she was exhausted and hurt from the fight before. Soon enough, a gunshot crackled and the baby fell backwards. From behind, a man carrying a white light came. He was tall and approached the baby to shoot it repeatedly. He introduced himself as Task Takada, a member of the Grotesque Kill Team. He was a young man and compared the kill team to mercenaries. Nothing formal had been announced regarding their founding until Grotesques had been studied more. Task tells Kitsune that they are indeed called Grotesques, and the kill team have been ordered to kill them on sight and extinguish all signs of their life. Some of them are bulletproof, and they are commonly burned to death instead of shot. Kitsune compared Task to a boy with an airsoft gun, doing some part-time extermination. But as he says, a mercenary doesn't need motive, only skill. A blaring alarm is heard nearby, which Task refers to as the grotesque detection alarm, but sometimes it's used for other things. Eventually, some cars rolled up to clean up the mess and extinguish all signs of life. They asked Ruby and Kitsune to keep all of this quiet to prevent panic from spreading amongst the public. They also asked for their government IDs, which Kitsune theorizes is less to prove any sort of legitimacy but to get their name so they may shadow them to make sure they don't spread information regarding the grotesques. The hunters methodically reduced the grotesque into a red mountain of meat. Ruby, however, sobbed out of fear, but also because she felt sorry for the grotesque, most likely because it was in the form of a large baby. The final volume of Baroquism Syndrome picks up some time after, with Kitsune talking to an android of sorts who describes the fact they are immortal and cannot die. Well, no, not really, this is their Baroque. They wish for such a thing. It is a popular Baroque as many people have a fear of death. Ruby came in soon after, stating she feels as though more and more Baroques have been appearing. She ponders if she will be good at selling Baroques, and tells Kitsune that she will teach him how to shoot if he taught her the ins and outs of his business. Confused how she can shoot, Kitsune questions her, but she brushes it off by asking him about the rumours regarding grotesques. It had been 99 days since the run-in with the Grotesque Kill Team. The new year had come and gone, and the Grotesque Kill Team had been formally founded and announced to the general public, most likely because of the increased presence of the grotesques, which somewhat pinned the government into a corner because of how much they were being spotted by the populace. As for the IDs Ruby and Kitsune had given to the kill squad, Kitsune gave them a fake, and Ruby threw hers away. Ruby began telling Kitsune about the rumours of angels, human-looking people with wings growing out of their backs. Of course we know, as the reader, that these are members of Malkuth, but remember that at this time they are a secret organisation. Kitsune thinks back to Fumi's three key words, Sensphere, Angel and Grotesque. All had been mentioned in some regard now. Sensphere being the spheres that seem to be causing people to go Baroque, and the ones that appeared during the situation with Suzume. Grotesques being the beasts that were wandering around. Much about them still unknown to Kitsune and the public. And now we have Angel. Ruby expands on them, stating that anyone who spots them must go through a trial to become an angel as well. Kitsune presumes it's a sort of Baroque, and Ruby tells him that even the Baroque kids get scared when this story is told to them, and Baroque people don't usually listen to what others say. Soon a routine earthquake happened. Routine, so the two didn't worry much, but recently they had been more persistent. Soon after, a knock came at the door. It was Fumi, the same boy who came here with the three key words and the Tarantella melody disc that incapacitated Suzume. It is here Fumi said something so simple yet so terrifying. Quote, "I have set fire to the world," unquote. He claims Suzume has been chosen by the Malkuth. Of course, Kitsune questioned him about what the Malkuth is, but the words Nerve Tower then poured from Fumi's mouth. Oddly, Ruby comforted Kitsune in that moment, before Fumi snapped out of his brief state of vagueness to tell Kitsune that he must go after Suzume. The three soon went to Suzume's place. Ruby seemed oddly very confident in Fumi, who was with them as they opened the door to Suzume's apartment. Someone had trashed the place. In an effort to find clues, Kitsune went to one unit that still worked, the same one that analysed the Tarantella melody disc. On it, Kitsune found out that Suzume left him a message. Quote, "To Kitsune, I pulled it off. Totally succeeded in recreating the melody that lets you be everywhere. If you want, you can listen to it too. But before that, I'll show you all the stuff I've collected on the sense spheres." Unquote. Of course, this all but confirms that the melody causes a sort of sensory overload. This allows you to look through every sense sphere. The rest of the information left was an endless stream of documents, images, and other files that Suzume had found. This is where Kitsune also found the initial data about the Yumi case, because remember, Baroquism Syndrome is written retrospectively by Kitsune. Within the words Malkuth was mentioned, it said the following regarding them. Quote, "The Malkuth, currently a small-scale religious order. Unlike previous religious doctrines on salvation through faith in a god such as the Buddha, the Malkuth instead teaches that only through fulfilling our obligation to protect God may we be healed. There are a limited number of people who possess the power to protect God. Therefore, the Malkuth does not actively engage in public outreach, but instead employs a soliciting method in which members occupying certain positions within the order evaluate and select those they wish to recruit." Suzume had left a note alongside this message. "The Malkuth are terrifying. Beware the Malkuth." Of course, this all takes place before the Archangel has taken control of the Malkuth. This paragraph here alone is the best definition for the Malkuth before he took over. This obviously confused Kitsune, especially because, according to Fumi, Suzume had been chosen by the Malkuth. Of course, there was the matter of God being mentioned, which on its own is a piece of insanity. During this time, Ruby found an angel feather on the floor, pure white amongst the equipment. Suzume had been taken by the angels. Meanwhile, more earthquakes were occurring around the globe, and the kill team siren was heard from outside. This only meant another grotesque had appeared nearby. Drawing his gun, Kitsune and Ruby ventured outside. Fumi, who had been guiding them there, had departed. Ruby warned that holding and pointing a gun might risk trouble with the law, but luckily Kitsune had a knife and a small flamethrower. Yes, a flamethrower. He learned from the kill team before that grotesques are weak to fire. He also brought a portable disc player with a disc inside it that Suzume had left for him, the restored Tarantella melody. No matter what was happening to the world at a rapid pace, whether it was natural disasters, the Malkuth, or grotesques, what was on Kitsune's mind at the time was finding and rescuing his friend Suzume. An appropriate motivation amidst the general chaotic and unconventional plot of Baroquism Syndrome. When it came to Ruby, Kitsune still wasn't sure of her absolute allegiance. But at this time she was an ally. He closed the shop and went off to the tower that he now knew the name of, the Nerve Tower. People going Baroque had become very common at this point. Passerbys of different physical distortions were very commonly seen. Kitsune had reported Suzume's vanishing to the police, but there had been many such cases recently. Some people began growing small wings from their backs too, but none as magnificent as the wings the feather that Ruby had found on the floor. According to her, only those of higher ranks in the Malkuth order had larger wings. The size of the wings is determined when someone becomes an angel, and the amount of power someone has to help God determines it. This means that lower-ranking angels will have smaller wings forever. Kitsune questions if they complain about smaller wings, and Ruby theorizes that maybe they prefer to have wings at all than none of them, like the common folk. Just by seeing the winged people become more commonplace is enough to say that the Malkuth in general was becoming more visible amongst the public. Their secrets and activities, though, were still just that, secret. Information on the Malkuth was hard to come by. Suzume's hacked files just weren't enough. The stories Ruby overheard, leaked by friends of adherents, were invaluable. The two made their way to the Nerve Tower. The tower itself was atop a man-made island that sat on the sea off the coast of the city. All of the government think tanks, corporate groups, and central institutions of Japan had gathered on that island. Kitsune questions how Malkuth gained power so quickly. On the outskirts, Kitsune and Ruby met with Fumi, who claimed that the Malkuth had been waiting for them. It turns out that Kitsune had been invited here in the first place. Fumi was there to see if Kitsune could complete his trial. Soon enough, more angels appeared. A presumed trap on Kitsune's end. The invitation was most likely sent to Kitsune after the Malkuth realized he was investigating them either way. A frog-like grotesque would appear too, alongside more smaller angels with spears. They demanded to not let him get away. Ruby, in that moment, threw her dagger into the grotesque's tongue, causing it to lash about and cause a general amount of chaos. The smaller angels were acting more like grotesques, and even Fumi had begun fighting back against them. In a desperate move, Kitsune went to play the disc player with the tarantella melody, but Ruby demanded he use it inside the tower. Ruby was in a bad state, but as she claimed, even if she dies, don't use it yet. Eventually, amidst the chaos, Task appeared, the first grotesque hunter that Ruby and Kitsune had met. In that moment, Kitsune saw a youthful man vanish with Fumi. The Malkuth adherents and the grotesques were not the ones Task wanted to save, as the hunters don't interfere with the Malkuth itself. Converts to Malkuth aren't considered citizens either, so it also isn't about protecting the innocent anymore either. Before he could check their ID, the two escaped towards the nerve tower. Eventually, the hunters stopped their chase as Ruby and Kitsune gained distance from them. In this moment, Kitsune asked why Ruby had been sticking with him all this time, with Ruby simply telling him to ask Fumi, who stood right ahead. He gave Ruby and Kitsune some earphones, with a microphone attached to them. He told the two that if they didn't wear them, they will be driven insane by the screams of God. These words would usually pour from a Baroque person's mouth, but Fumi lacked the eyes of such a person. Fumi took the two closer to the nerve tower, more precisely to a town that led up to it. An ultra-modern, run-down city. Here, Kitsune asked Fumi what a sense sphere really was. Fumi explained that they can be found anywhere, just like God can. Kitsune then asked Fumi what angels were, and Fumi simply told him they help God. And finally, he asked what grotesques were, and they were those who expected too much from God. As for God itself, Fumi simply explained that God is God, the same God everyone else knows, a great creator. Ruby's lack of surprise suggests that she knew these things, and Kitsune asked if she knew Fumi all along. Everything from the point of Fumi giving Kitsune the tarantella melody was his trial. Ruby remained silent at continued questions, but it was already too late for that. They had reached the entrance of the nerve tower itself. Inside was dark and cramped, filled with scaffoldings and doors. Down from the entrance was a spiral staircase around a central column. Here, Ruby explains amid some questions that Fumi is an elite angel, even if he lacks wings. Her eyes were Baroque. Delusions of some type were flowing through her. The headphones given to them apparently was to drown out the voice of God, which in retrospect confuses Kitsune, because this should in turn block out Baroques. Ruby was made to go to Kitsune because he never listened to the disc like Suzume did, which made Suzume eventually go to the Malkuth. Soon enough, they came to a white open space, almost like a lab. There, in a white coat, stood Suzume. His face and hair were wet, but he was firm and his speech was normal. Kitsune explained to Suzume he was there to save him, but Suzume explained that while he was investigating the tarantella melody, he learned of the existence of God and angels. He learned that he had a more important role to play than just an angel. Kitsune accused him of being brainwashed, but Suzume explained that it is only natural that your world would change after finding out such things. Suzume then tells him that he wishes to show him the place of God. Fumi had vanished and Ruby had collapsed to the ground. Kitsune questions further, causing Suzume to get frustrated and call off his trial. In this moment, two more angels appeared. One of them the youth Kitsune briefly spotted before outside the tower with Fumi, and the other was a man who looked a little like Fumi with larger wings. This was the man who penned the perception system to find sense spheres. The picture on that file matched him anyway. It seems that by not listening to the melody, Kitsune was more resistant to the ideas of the Malkuth, and he was no longer welcome in it. Suzume realized this and deep down appreciated Kitsune's efforts for trying to rescue him. Suzume gave a reassuring smile as he exited with the youthful angel. Kitsune was left with the man with larger wings, who was pointing a gun at him. He fired, but in that moment Ruby lunged in front of Kitsune. The bullet hit her, and as he prepared to shoot again, Kitsune lunged at him, more specifically the gun he was holding. The gun was light, and he managed to disarm and aim the gun at him. Ruby's fingertips had already turned purple, and the whites of her eyes still open. Still training the gun on the angel, he closed his eyes, saying a silent thank you. Even if she was a pawn of the Malkuth, he had fun. Ruby seemingly died protecting him and the disc, the Tarantella melody. Kitsune theorizes that if someone who had been brainwashed by it listened to it again, they may come back. It was the only thing he could do at this point. The angel denies it was brainwashing at all, and Kitsune played the melody. The angel turned and fled. Luckily, Kitsune had the earphones on still, which blocked much of the frequency. Here, Ruby's voice was heard on the intercom, guiding Kitsune out the tower. Malkuth adherents began following him. Ruby explains that she is taking control of Fumi through what remains of their shared consciousness, something Malkuth members have, maybe a sort of Baroque. At least that is seemingly implied. The adherents were carrying guns, but none were firing to avoid damaging the tower. Nerve Tower is a hint, being the name. Maybe it is all a single system. Still following Ruby's instructions, it turns out it was all a lie. Fumi stood there and was the one who was speaking to him all along. He wished to put Kitsune's theories to the test. Play the melody, and if he was cured of this supposed brainwashing, he will be spared. If not, he will kill Kitsune to protect the Nerve Tower and God, as ordered. Next to him was the youthful angel once more. Kitsune played the melody, causing it to flow throughout the tower. It was like a nursery rhyme. An alarm sounded and the youthful angel collapsed. Fumi in that moment spoke, but the shared consciousness meant it was really Ruby this time. She explains that she will remain here, and Suzume will make his way out if he decides to. Fumi himself, though, will always remain as he was, because some people remained in such a way even without the melody. She is glad Kitsune was a failure to the Malkuth. Kitsune began his escape, and had a small vision through the melody of Ruby ascending to heaven. Kitsune didn't understand a thing about God or the world, but he succeeded in helping Ruby go back to where she belonged, heaven, where all angels belong. This was Kitsune's Baroque, something he could hold onto amidst this world. Water then washed through the tower, a fail-safe perhaps. His body and mind faded into it, and the sound became one with the tower itself. Outside, Tusk found Kitsune unconscious. They took him to the hospital. The Malkuth were not destroyed, and it was only growing day by day. Kitsune explains that maybe people can't be blamed for wanting to become a member of the Malkuth, to grow wings so they may fly from all these disasters, even if said wings were fake. Kitsune writes this entire story in the form of an email to the youth that he broke out of brainwashing, the one next to Fumi when he began to play it. He was the one who rescued him, according to Task, who explained his appearance. Kitsune lives now under constant surveillance, and can only hope Suzume is safe and Ruby, in her own mind, is resting. Kitsune didn't see the youthful angel that he helped ever again, and he only hopes that he can speak to him one day about the secrets of Malkuth. And that is the end of Baroquism Syndrome. Again, Baroque Syndrome is simply just Baroquism Syndrome adapted into a visual novel with multiple paths. These events, though, are what seem to be the canon ones. I think most of us can collectively agree that even if Syndrome makes the base game a little richer, it's a bit messy. Maybe some things were lost in translation, but ultimately it is a very simple story told in a somewhat convoluted way, just like the actual game. In the simplest of terms, it is a story of a man and a girl, with the former getting too far into the business of an organization that is way too far beyond him, and suffering with the consequences for such for the rest of his life. If it wasn't obvious, the Archangel did make an appearance in the form of an angel that killed Ruby after she tried to protect Kitsune from him. The Tarantella melody too plays a role in some later discussed lore. Ultimately though, the literal connections to the game are few. We don't see many returning characters, only terminology and locations. What it represents, ultimately, is the closest thing to a prologue of Baroque's world, not necessarily its story. By the end of Syndrome, we see the Malkuth swiftly rising to power, and the sense of chaos rising. Grotesques become more relevant, and even an encounter with one is enough to risk death. This, too, serves to show how scary Number 12's situation is in the main game. I found a forum post discussing Syndrome because I was curious of people's opinions on it. Some say that, while it's well written, it may be seen as a glorified fanfiction. Maybe the way it handles the relationship between Ruby and Kitsune can be seen as romantic by the end, but I personally don't really see this. They are more like complicated acquaintances, and fanfictions often include already existing characters, which Syndrome massively lacks besides the Archangel, who isn't even called that in the writings by the way, so it might not even be confirmed. As already said though, it's included in this video because at the end of the day it does freshen up the world by quite a lot. There's a sequel called Interludium which takes place after Syndrome, but to be completely honest with you, it doesn't really do too much for the wider universe. It's like a bonus story if anything. If you want to read it for yourself, check out the translation page on the Nerve Tower website. It's all there to read. Baroque has a few spin-off games, most notably Baroque Shooting and Become a Meta Being. I will briefly go over them now because they are worth at least mentioning, because despite both titles being heavily flawed and completely neglecting the tone of the original game, they do exist and at the end of the day are quite fun. Baroque Shooting is a shmup game, also called a bullet hell game, based on the world of Baroque. Despite being a shmup, being a shoot 'em up for those unaware, it is a very stripped down version of such a game that lacks the mechanics of many games that fall within the genre. It is, though, quite hard, much like many of these games are. The game is very short, but this is simply because you technically have infinite lives. It has a leaderboard which tracks your score up to the point of your first death though, meaning that whilst you can beat the game very easily, you only really have one life for it to count towards the leaderboards. There are 5 stages, and in each stage you encounter more enemies. More enemies means more bullets that you have to dodge, in turn making it harder. You can pick up parasites which buff and change your attacks. You can also pick up Idea Sephira to wipe the map with a special move, or pick up a normal Sephira which will simply heal you. You play as a Little, being one of the grotesques that I am yet to truly expand on. But for reference, you first see them when you enter the Nerve Tower outside of the prior simulation. Every boss you fight is either a character from the game or one of the stronger grotesques. For example, the final boss of this game is the Archangel, who has 2 forms. His regular one and one that uses the sprite, where he is pierced on the sense sphere before God. He also uses countless angelic rifles, which is pretty metal. Overall though, I don't think shooting is worth playing unless you are a fan of this genre of game, and go into it knowing it's quite bare bones and has a large lack of content. The price of it on Steam, at least in Britain, is also a bit high for my tastes considering these things. If you are a fan of Baroque, I wouldn't automatically recommend it either, because the tone goes directly against the game and the lore. It all feels very bizarre to me to even have a game in this genre, but I guess Sting decided to make it anyways. This game has no story because if it did, it wouldn't make any sense and would go directly against any existing canon. If you like shmups and Baroque though, maybe try it out. I leave it up to you, but the game is simple enough for my simple look at it here to give you a pretty complete idea about it. Become a Meta Being is... it's literally Frogger. Okay, moving on. I jest, but yeah. It's a Frogger-inspired game that ties into the world of Baroque, fit with systems and gameplay to match the genre. Like Baroque Syndrome and Shooting, it is on Steam, but unlike Syndrome, it isn't Japanese only. Oh my god, my phone. Fuck. You know what, I'm gonna keep that in. I do actually really like this game, but it suffers again from the lack of progression systems outside of anything cosmetic. When you play, you earn currency, Idea Sephora and Green Sephora. You can acquire them from their respective game modes, Normal and Countdown. When you die in Normal, you start all over again and gain Idea Sephora depending on your distance. Countdown, meanwhile, gives you 1 minute to go as far as you can, and if you die, you simply respawn on the platform that you last jumped from. You can then spend these currencies on a gacha system. Yes, you heard that correctly, this game has a gambling system. God. The meta being you control is actually one of the smaller Gru grotesques that spawn from the Katos. The gacha system simply unlocks skins for this Gru, but when you apply the skin, you can also change how the level looks. Fits with a new soundscape as well. Speaking of the level, there are different grotesques fit with unique mechanics to take you down, similar to their main game versions. Some are ranged, some simply melee you, and of course you have the Jerry Roms, who will just blow you to pieces. During your venture, you may also come across some of the NPCs found in the game, such as Orim and Thumin, Box Thing and Neck Thing. They serve as simple obstacles and don't really do much other than stand in a singular spot. The game seems to use the same enemy designs and soundscapes of the Baroque remake on the PlayStation 2 and the Nintendo Wii. Despite my gripes with Become a Meta Being's lack of progression systems that changed the gameplay, I actually found it oddly addicting. There even exists a leaderboard to compete on every week, so there is a sense of competition. The way to properly progress isn't really statistical, but rather through learning how each grotesque works. Somewhat like the original game. The reason I don't apply much of this critique to Baroque itself is because Baroque has a larger progression with its story, and during your runs there is a sense of power progression, which is incredibly satisfying. Become a Meta Being would benefit having things like extra health, the ability to slow down certain parts of the game, hell, even having some lore pieces to unlock would have been cool too. Either way, the game is seemingly priced with these things in mind, so I can't complain a massive amount to the point of heavily disliking the game. There is another spin-off game called Baroque Typing, but it continues the trend of being less of an expansion of Baroque and a simple adaptation of its iconography into another game genre. It's also not on Steam and doesn't have a proper English patch, so overall it wouldn't really do much for the video. Put simply, it is a typing game set in the world of Baroque, as the name implies. Okay, time to finish up the game itself. Baroque is technically separated into 3 runs. The simulation, the initial run, and the second run. Of course, you can die and restart your current run, but ultimately there are 3 major runs marked by a specific point of progression. The second one was finished when you interact with God for the first time, and number 12 realizes that the world needs one more chance, with his twin seemingly taking his place in this new world, who still retains the same survivor's guilt he had. Thus begins the third and final run. This run is largely about finding the last pieces of lore and story, such as what God represents, the sense spheres, and the Dabar fusion. Eliza, the guardian angel, and Alice also play a prominent role here. There's a lot of questions that aren't answered in the game itself, so we must go to the Baroque World Guidance book to get some information, which is essentially a guidebook of the game. It's Japanese only, but luckily the Nerve Tower website has translated pieces of it. There are only a few plot points that are mentioned in the book, as the rest are answered in the game itself, which is good. In my Near Replicant video, I critiqued that game for having huge and important pieces of lore being only in writings based on the game that aren't in the game itself. I would give Baroque the same critique, except these things in the World Guidance book are somewhat inconsequential to the overall messaging and story of the game. The only thing the guidebook gives that the game doesn't are simply bridges between certain events in and outside the game. Another helpful resource, as explained by now, is Baroquism Syndrome, which is a major reason why I even went over it in the first place. Without it, you are missing some pieces of the lore. Without these resources, you can still understand the plot of the game as well as the messaging it has, and also understand the characters. It's just that with them, you will understand them even more. Baroque Syndrome gives a good idea of the events that lead up to Baroque itself. The guidebook, though, gives some other information. One such example is the following bit of research from the Nerve Tower website, which explains that Baroque's timeline most likely started with the discovery of God, as that is the earliest point of reference. And the year of that is most likely in the latter half of the 2020s, based on the dates and events detailed in Baroquism Syndrome. So what changes straight away when number 12 decides to reset the world using God's idea Sephiroth from the initial run of the game? Well, presuming you saw Eliza going through the wall, Neckthing will actually be buried underground, with his head poking out. If you missed Eliza, you can give Neckthing some cultivation fluid instead, which causes the same thing. This cultivation fluid is found in the room the Guardian Angel stands in, but considering the optional nature of that initial meeting, you most likely won't need to go out of your way to do that, and instead just follow Eliza through the wall. Neckthing would cry whenever he would see cultivation fluid, as said by the Horned Woman. This implies that he and the Guardian Angel are connected to some degree, as only she has access to the fluid up to this point. Whilst in the ground, it would seem that Neckthing has begun blooming a flower from his mouth. This is if you gave him a heartseed as requested. Later on, he will die and leave his idea Sephiroth behind, as well as some entrails. Neckthing is actually a good example of how Baroques affect someone. We know that Baroques influence people in different ways, but the reason why Neckthing's neck was so large is because he wishes to avert his eyes, as confirmed by Mind Reading Thing in the tower. Here lies some theory based off just these pieces of dialogue alone. Neckthing helped the Guardian Angel based off his reaction to the cultivation fluid, and feels great sin because of it. Now we can get into the meat of the final run. Some NPCs will recommend you show Neckthing's idea Sephiroth to the Sentry Angel who guards the lab. Hell, he asks to see it too. If you do so and combat later, Sentry Angel will imitate Neckthing and bury himself in the ground, making him unable to guard the laboratory. Heading inside it, you'll be cut off from progressing further by being locked inside a testing room by a scientist. Here you will find some of number 12's clones. They beg number 12 to purify them and take their Sephira for Eliza's sake, and upon doing so, each of the clones will vanish. Most likely a chain reaction of sorts because of the Sephira they have between them. From here, you will receive your whole Sephira. Now, as suggested by your clones, you should bring this to Eliza. I think now is a good time to explain what exactly the twins, being Eliza and Alice, represent. From this point onward is a lot of making things clearer and wrapping the story up. Eliza and Alice are essentially aspects of God, but to fully understand how they became such, we must further delve into the Dabar fusion, being the mentioned fusion of number 12 and God. The Coriel, the true think tank group behind the Malkuth, didn't believe the Archangel, who was telling the Malkuth that God wanted to destroy them. The Coriel devised a plan to merge a member of their own with God, so that God may be able to communicate with humanity at an understandable level, rather than being through the Archangel. We know these things thanks to the dialogue already mentioned. The Archangel, though, ordered them to be torn apart mid-fusion after he found out. This actually caused the Great Heatwave, but why is this? Sense spheres are the key, the mysterious objects that can be used as tools to transfer items, knowledge and voices. What are they exactly? Well, for better context, let's go back to Baroquism Syndrome. Remember the perception program that Suzume found after digging into the data the Malkuth had gathered? We know that was used to find sense spheres. The Coriel were the ones that used it, and they found sense spheres that were indeed living things, almost like organs. These organs corrected matter near them, before spitting them back out to restore what was there. Of course, since there were so many of them, an effort was put forward to find their potential source, using the perception program. Around this time, God may have been found. Sense spheres are the literal organs of God that it uses to find and correct the matter in the cosmos. Distorted matter, matter that, according to God, isn't meant to be, matter that isn't welcome in its universe that it created. Now, let's stick with the terminology of things in Baroque Syndrome. the tarantella melody, an audio recording of the voice of God that, when listened to, drives people mad, or at least distorts their mind to some degree. We saw this firsthand in Syndrome through Suzume. There are many theories how the Archangel came to be, but the Coriel member in the Nerve Tower describes some of the sensiphiers to be artificial, created by the Malkuth and the Archangel. According to the Coriel, too, this entire system drove him mad. According to Yonemitsu himself though, his real name is Tenju Kyoshiro. The Nerve Tower website raises that the perception device could have been used by the Archangel to talk to God itself, which may have also been the reason he went mad. Eventually though, he would become obsessed with using God to create a new world in his own vision, and made a new persona called the Archangel. The tarantella melody would continue to be used to brainwash and recruit people, as seen with Suzume in Baroque Syndrome. Speaking of, a theory I have is that the earthquakes in Syndrome were actually the Malkuth making space for God after finding it. And another theory I have, which I'm not 100% confident on, is that Fumi was actually the scientist who made perception, as there is a comment in the writing that Fumi looks like the Archangel, and Fumi also looks like the scientist who founded such. Hence why he also said that he would set the world on fire. Without perception, God would have never been found, which eventually led to the Great Heatwave thanks to the Malkuth's tampering, or should I say, the Archangel's tampering. When the Archangel tore number 12 apart from God during the Coriel's efforts to make the Dabar fusion so they could find out what God really wanted, the sensiphiers around the world began to panic. They rapidly tried to correct themselves. This caused the heatwave, and the entire world was distorted in a panicked effort by God to correct it one last time. The Coriel were punished, including number 12. Who now had the ability to purify and correct those around him after the partial fusion with God. In the process of the fusion though, he had lost his voice. This also extended to the clones of the Archangel that he began producing. The Archangel would use the survivor's guilt to press him onward toward God, to purify it with the angelic rifle. Now we have some interpretations and questions answered. This is largely thanks to the outside sources discussed, but also through already existing dialogue in the game. Now, how on earth does the angelic rifle purify God? What even is it? This involves the requirements for the true ending of the game, and by far some of the most complicated pieces of storytelling inside it. Going back to the Nerve Tower, you will find Eliza again. This time though, you can give her your idea Sephiroth when she goes through the wall. Why do this, and why did number 12 purify his clones? It's incredibly vague, but this is somewhat of a metaphor of number 12 rebelling. By getting his own idea Sephiroth back, his memories essentially get restored, and he breaks free from the brainwashing and manipulation of the Archangel. The panic of the Malkuth members also speaks for itself. Something has gone very, very wrong. Their most useful tool has now broken free. As for why you give her the Sephiroth, again quite vague, but basically it's a part of the restorative effort by God. Number 12 realizes who he is again, and despite that continues to press forward. His past has been restored. So the twins are essentially creations of God that were made after the failed Dabar fusion. Due to it and number 12's partial fusion, there was actually some part of God lost. And in an effort to restore pieces of itself, it created Eliza and Alice. Eliza and Alice wish to restore God's ability to feel pain, which had been taken from it, so it can't fix this distorted world on its own. At least that's heavily implied. How do we know this? So, on this new run you can find the Guardian Angel on level 10. This time you will trigger a cutscene, a conversation between the Guardian Angel and the Archangel. The Archangel describes that they will gradually begin taking away God's pain, as pain is what tells God the presence of distortion, and causes the sensiphiers to correct it. The two-person team to remove God's pain would be Nekthing and Guardian Angel. This is the sin he refuses to bear, and why he looks away from the world. The Guardian Angel though, although it isn't too obvious through the game itself, is confirmed by Yonemitsu to have had feelings for the Archangel. This eventually faded away when he became a megalomaniac. When the two extracted God's pain, they removed its ability to correct distortions in the world. and when they put them into chemical form, or more specifically a fluid form, it soon gave birth to the littles, being the angelic insects, the very embodiment of pain itself. They would be created into a form of ammunition, and if fired, they would cause anything to be removed, as God's pain would signal that thing needs to be corrected. This is the ammunition for the angelic rifle. This also applied to God itself, practically causing it to correct itself. This is most likely what the Archangel's plan was all along, so he could get God's idea Sephiroth and create a world, headed by himself. He, though, still lacked the purification ability Number 12 had, through the failed Dabar fusion. Hence why he asked Number 12 to help him, both to atone for his sin but also so he could bear the pain of the grotesques through the infinite clones. The Guardian Angel asks you not to use the angelic rifle at all, and instead free the rest of the littles. This means up until that point you cannot use the rifle. On floor 15 you will find a gate. Presuming you followed the Guardian Angel's instruction, you will be able to enter. Here you can purify the littles and acquire God's pain in the form of an idea Sephiroth. Now with the idea Sephiroth of the littles being God's pain, and the two divinities who were created by God to restore your past and its pain, you can give Alice on floor 16 the idea Sephiroth. She will then restore the pain of God. From here the tower will expand to 21 floors. This is your final gauntlet of enemies, and it's incredibly challenging. However, by now you should have mastered Baroque's gameplay, and have a newfound determination to finish it. It'll be a good idea to cultivate parasites at this point, which means to infest one parasite with another to give it multiple effects. This helped me quite a lot. Most things have fallen into place now. God's pain has been restored, so it may correct the world. And Number 12, even with his past restored, still wishes to fuse with God, because he still has a piece of them with him, the ability to purify. Here you may merge with God one last time. The most important line in the game is read off during this final cutscene. Trying to purify the world was, in itself, a distorted delusion. We are all distorted beings. Even if the world is restored somehow, it will still be distorted. The ending of Baroque is incredibly open, and there are many theories as to what happened after this point, but in my mind, I believe that the world either continued the way it was, or was remade, only to be distorted again eventually by human effort. The tampering of God is what caused the Great Heatwave, and the concept of Baroques and grotesques seem to have come around naturally thanks to God's growing insanity. Clones may be continued to be produced too, but I seriously don't see the Archangel or the Malkuth living on from this point, as it may be depicted that when Number 12 purified his clones, he also destroyed the entire system within the lab itself. This ending may be underwhelming to some, but I find it bittersweet and beautiful. The truth is, this world is distorted and corrupted, and in Baroque's case, even if it may be a nihilist approach, they have no choice but to accept it. There is beauty in their distortion, and that is what makes this ending, oddly, quite a happy one. No more despair, just a quiet acceptance. Maybe one day the world will simply fade into nothingness, but ultimately this is how it is, and how it will continue to be. To conclude, Baroque is a game that, in my eyes, is the singular most profound roguelike ever made. The way the story could be interpreted is in the dozens. Some may argue the Archangel is actually right, and amidst his clear ruthlessness and ideals of racial purity, it may be worth living in a world with such a fascistic environment, rather than one of continuous mutation and decay. But here lies Baroque's centralmost theme, acceptance. As one of the most common phrases in the game's marketing, and in itself says, hold Baroque inside. Not just of the world, but also of those around you. Japanese society in general is quite traditional, and even if the world is slowly moving away from said traditionalism as a whole, there are still those that insist tradition is the way to go, especially in times of great struggle. This isn't to say Japan is ableist, but tradition can easily give birth to misunderstanding to those out of the norm. But the Archangel himself is the stimulus of this sort of debate that Baroque proposes. Is a pure world worth it even amidst potential prosecution for things that you cannot control? It all depends. Should we really allow a continuous existence of torment just for the sake of acceptance? The Archangel to some may be a necessary evil to achieve a sort of utopia. Even if this utopia is in his singular vision, it will most likely be better than what the world currently is. But this means that many will not even be allowed to exist at all, thanks to the hands of a singular human being turned God, rather than the force of nature. And God, in its form in Baroque, does not discriminate, and neither does nature. And God, if anything, is a force of nature in Baroque, as nature rules all at the end of the day. It's an extremely complicated debate, and I myself don't actually take any side when it comes to Baroque's specific case. There's no ideology without downsides, and there are extremes for everything. Metal Gear Solid goes into the debate of traditionalism in its own case, but there are entire subsections on YouTube talking about how Metal Gear tackles the debate of genes and nationalism, etc., of the wants of an individual and of a country and society. Although I think Metal Gear leans more to one side of the debate than the other. Speaking of things akin to Baroque, I recommend the movie Mad God. Not only is it a monolithic achievement in stop-motion animation, but it's a very good movie in general created by Phil Tippett. An absolute masterpiece in my mind. The soundtrack is fantastic too. Speaking of, the soundtrack for the live-action Kashern movie composed by Shiro Sagisu heavily suits the tone of Baroque. It's in my top 10 soundtracks ever made and an absolute masterpiece. I would have loved to use some of the tracks in the video, but copyright would have bit me, even with fair use. Listen to the soundtrack or watch the movie, and also watch Mad God, and tell me what you think of them in the comments. Baroque is by far the most complicated and confusing story I've covered on this channel. This is due to the amount of pure interpretation it allows in its storytelling. Not much is truly defined and a lot of it is up in the air, but it is at least consistent in its tone. I struggled a lot to piece some things together, and I tried my best to not have the Nerve Tower website help me too much, which in itself is based off interpretation a lot of the time because it has no choice but to do so. If you have your own theories about things, let me know, but ultimately for Baroque there aren't really many right or wrongs when it comes to the takes surrounding the lore and story. Some of it is defined, yes, but a lot of it is simply not. For example, one fun fact I want to mention is that tarot cards played a role in some of the creature designs in Baroque. And after the Archangel had access to God to some degree, he fed these ideas to God. Shinto is also relevant beyond my own comparison near the start of this video, but I will simply ask that if you are interested in some religious analysis, I suggest that you go to the Shinto essay on the Nerve Tower website. I've mentioned some aspects of these essays myself, but purposely didn't use them in excess because I want you, as the viewer, to have even more to look into when it comes to Baroque. Much of it is interpretation, of course, but the website has some extremely interesting writings about how Baroque's real-world influences shine through. This is also another way of me thanking that website, which is by far the largest source of information about the game on the entire internet. Like all my videos, I recommend to play the game yourself to draw your own conclusions, but Baroque is pretty inaccessible, even as an emulated experience. I had quite a difficult time to get it running in the first place after having to patch it. So if there is anything I am thankful for when I finish this project is that I will never have to emulate this game ever again because I don't actually see myself playing the game for a long while after this. In fact, I don't think I'll ever see myself playing Baroque again unless there's some major port to modern platforms. I've truly had my fill with this game, and despite loving it, it's quite a headache to put together. And I believe that is everything. I am really glad I did this video and remade it, despite some people thinking it may be strange to remake a year-old video, but if anything, this video is for me. I really appreciate you all watching, and like always, my social media links are in the description. Stay safe and thank you for watching. Hold Baroque inside. Thank you to the supporters in the shoutout tiers: Worm, Times, Moon Goddesses, Carl Essinger, Simeon, Alex T, Vodes, Colin, Ebelan Rhyme, Malthrax, Symphonics, Frosty 5983, BM1RR, Folian, Falk, Leaf Winter, Crux Lamar 9681, Musha 45, Chowder, Megasneed 007, Jonas, Fried Ants K8L, 17th Writer, Vitor BBS, Josh Fawkes, Bruce Lee Tacos, Mr. Fallout 8060, Krieg 1212, Wostan, Yellow Forest, Corrupto, Halusi 049, C1, Azure, The Salesman, Jason Bolton, Cole Smith, The Way Is One, Termina, Kahara, Angelus 9191, Jack, Vionitric, Helen Lopez, Declan, Poseidon 1234, Face Filled with Face, Glass, Brady Hendricks, and Lolulop.